The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from An American Prophecy, The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe. And this book was published, I believe, in the late 90s, just FYI. 1998. America feels like it's unraveling. Though we live in an era of relative peace and comfort, we have settled into a mood of pessimism about the long-term future, fearful that our superpower nation is somehow rotting from within. Neither an epic victory nor over communism nor an extended upswing of the business cycle can buoy our public spirit. The Cold War and the New Deal struggles are plainly over, but we are of no mind to bask in their successes. The America of today feels worse in its fundamentals than the one many of us remember from our youth, a society presided over by those of supposedly lesser consciousness. Wherever we look, from L.A. to D.C., from Oklahoma City to Sun City, we see paths to a foreboding future. We yearn for civic character, but satisfy ourselves with symbolic gestures and celebrity circuses. We perceive no greatness in our leaders, a new meanness in ourselves. Small wonder that each new election brings a new jolt, its aftermath, a new disappointment. I'd add this was at the height of the Newt Gingrich and impeachment and all that kind of craziness. Not long ago, America, which is the predecessor, has really set up Donald Trump. Not long ago, America was more than the sum of its parts. Now it is less. Around World War II, we were proud as a people, but modest as individuals. Fewer than 2 people in 10 said yes when asked, "Are you a very important person?" Today, more than 6 in 10 say yes. Where we once thought ourselves collectively strong, we now regard ourselves as individually entitled. Yet even while we exalt our own personal growth, we realize that millions of self-actualized persons don't add up to an actualized society. Popular trust in virtually every American institution, from business and governments to churches and newspapers, keeps falling to new lows. Public debts soar, the middle class shrinks, welfare dependencies deepen, and cultural arguments worsen by the year. We now have the highest incarceration rate and the lowest eligible voter participation rate of any major democracy in the world. Statistics inform us that many adverse trends, crime, divorce, abortion, scholastic aptitudes, may have bottomed out, but we're not reassured. Optimism still attaches to self, but no longer to family or community. This is the consequence of Reaganism. Most Americans express more hope for their own prospects than for their children's or the nation's. Parents widely fear that the American dream, which was there solidly for their parents and still there barely for them, will not be there for their kids. Young householders are reaching their mid-30s, never having known a time when America seemed to be on the right track. Middle-aged people look at their thin savings accounts and slim to none pensions, scoff at an illusory Social Security trust fund, and try not to dwell on what a burden their old age could become. Seniors separate into their own leisure world, recoiling at the lost virtue of youth while trying not to think about the future. We perceive our civic challenge as some vast, insoluble Rubik's Cube. Behind each problem lies another problem that must be solved first, and behind that lies another and another ad infinitum. To fix crime, we have to fix the family, but before we do that, we have to fix welfare, and that means fixing our budget, and that means fixing our civic spirit, but we can't do that without fixing moral standards, and that means fixing our schools and churches, and that means fixing the inner cities, and that's impossible unless we fix crime. There's no fulcrum upon which to rest a policy lever. People of all ages sense that something huge will have to sweep across America before the gloom can be lifted. But that's an awareness we suppress. As a nation, we're in deep denial. While we grope for answers, we wonder if analysis may be crowding out our intuition. The reward of the historian is to locate patterns that recur over time and to discover the natural rhythms of social experience. In fact, at the core of modern history lies this remarkable pattern. Over the past 5 centuries, Anglo-American society has entered a new era, a new turning, every 2 decades or so. At the start of each turning, people change how they feel about themselves, the culture, the nation, and the future. Turnings come in cycles of 4. Each cycle spans the length of a long human life, roughly 80 to 100 years, a unit of time the ancients called seculum. Together, the 4 turnings of the seculum comprise history's seasonal rhythm of growth, maturation, entropy, and destruction. The first turning is a high, an upbeat era of strengthening institutions and weakening individualism, where a new civic order implants and the old values regime decays. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era of spiritual upheaval when the civic order comes under attack from a new values regime. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era of strengthening individualism and weakening institutions when the old civic order decays and the new values regime implants. And the fourth turning is a crisis, a decisive era of secular upheaval when the values regime propels the replacement of the old civic order with a new one. Each turning comes with its own identifiable mood. Always these mood shifts catch people by surprise. In the current seculum, the first turning was the American high of the Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy presidencies. As World War II wound down, no one predicted that America would soon become so confident and institutionally muscular, yet so conformist and spiritually complacent. But that's what's happened. The second turning was the consciousness revolution, stretching from the campus revolts of the mid-60s to the tax revolts of the early 80s. Before John Kennedy was assassinated, no one predicted that America was about to enter an era of personal liberation and cross a cultural divide that would separate anything thought or said after from anything thought or said before. But that's what happened. The third turning has been the culture wars, an era that began with Reagan's
mid-1980s Morning in America and is due to expire around the middle of the decade, 8 or 10 years.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday and greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. The White House has released their budget, Mick Mulvaney's crowning achievement. Mick Mulvaney, who was a cokehead right-wing troll when he was in Congress and opposed any kind of spending on anything except the military and police. Because, you know, if you're a billionaire like the Koch brothers and their buddies, you really don't need anything except the military and the police to keep the riffraff in line, right? Build some more prisons, maybe build a wall. This is some kind of an insane joke. The title of the budget is called Efficient, Effective, Accountable, an American Budget. Right, accountable. This is nuts. It's projecting that the tax receipts are going to drop by $314 billion next year and $400 billion the year after that. Why? Because of Trump's and the Republicans' tax scam, right? They blew up the budget by borrowing $1.5 trillion to give to the Koch brothers and their friends. But it gets even worse. The budget would cut $554 billion from Medicare over the next 10 years. Now, there's 55 million people who are on Medicare right now. The majority of them are over 65. There are some exceptions, but they're few and far between. But of those 55 million people who are on Medicare now, you know, it used to be the old saw was that the older voters were reliably Republican voters. Retired people in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s, they were, you know, the Republicans viewed them as conservative. I mean, you know, the average age of people watching Fox so-called news is 70 years old, more or less. So, you know, Republicans always liked those folks, or at least knew that they had to answer to retired people. Until Chris Kobach came along, until they figured out this voting scam, this program to prevent older people from voting. It's not much reported. I mean, you know, their efforts to prevent people of color from voting are fairly well known, and their efforts to gerrymander races are fairly well known. But one of the benefits to the Republican Party of requiring not just ID to prove your citizenship, but ID that has not expired. See, citizenship doesn't expire. If you've got a driver's license that says you're a citizen, and the driver's license expired last month, you're still a citizen, and you're still you. But you can't use that driver's license to vote in 20-some-odd Republican states. Which means that as people age out of the driving pool, which typically happens in people in their 70s and certainly in their 80s, as they age out of that driving pool, they lose their ability to vote. So the Republicans are less and less concerned about retired people. They don't give a rat's ass about retired people. They're actively working to prevent retired people from voting. And so, you know, they've reached the point now, apparently, where they've blocked enough people over 65 from voting that they don't care about any kind of backlash that they're going to get from cutting $554 billion from Medicare over 10 years. That's not $1 million, that's $1 billion. That's $554 million 1,000 times. $554 billion they're going to cut out of Medicare. A lot of it, by the way, is they're going to make a slew of changes to drug pricing. They're still forbidding Medicare from negotiating prices with pharmaceutical companies. So they're still guaranteeing you know, a roughly $60 billion a year profit to the drug industry, to the pharmaceutical industry. But they're going to make you, if you're a retired person, if you're on Medicare, pay for more of it. As the Washington Post, Damian Paletta writes in the Washington Post just an hour ago, seniors would progress more slowly through the coverage gap known as the donut hole. Far few people would reach the phase where they only pay 5% of the drug cost and where Medicare is on the hook for 80% of the drug price. They're also going to cut Medicaid. They're going to cut food stamps. We're talking over a 10-year period of a combined cut of $3 trillion. That's $300 billion a year in cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps. And by the way, they're also going to add $7 trillion to the debt because they're just jacking enormous amounts of money off to the military-industrial complex and protections to, you know, basically any industry that wants to offshore jobs will get a tax break for doing that. This is breathtaking. This is just breathtaking. Whether they're going to lower Medicaid spending by roughly $250 billion over the next 10 years. That's $25 billion a year that they're going to cut out of Medicaid. Food stamps, they're going to cut $214 billion a year over 10 years. That's $21 billion a year cut from food stamps. And people on food stamps get, what, $1.50 a meal? I mean, it's not even, it's incredible. And then they've got this weird category. We're going to save $139 billion over 10 years by reducing improper government payments. Right? So the GOP scam rolls on. And frankly is putting our economy at risk. I wrote a piece about this for alternate.org that was published over the weekend. It's still up on their homepage. And it's titled, How the GOP Used a Two Santa Clauses Tactic to Con America for Nearly 40 Years. And sure enough, David Lynch and Damian Paletta, the guy who wrote the piece that I was just quoting about the Trump budget that was just rolled out, they wrote another piece. This was on February 11th. This would have been yesterday, saying Trump is abandoning ideological consistency. The Republicans are. On Monday, Trump is slated to announce a new budget plan, which is not going to attempt to balance the federal budget. This is a sharp contrast to the party's opposition to President Barack Obama's stimulus program during the Great Recession. Paul Ryan back then warned of a debt crisis, and Mick Mulvaney, then a congressman from South Carolina, derided Obama's spending plans as a joke and backed a constitutional amendment requiring a balanced budget. Now, GOP leaders are largely silent. And see, all over Washington, D.C., you've got reporters and pundits scratching their heads going, this is weird. I thought the Republicans, you know, screamed and yelled bloody murder about deficits and debt. They only do that when there's a Democrat in the White House. I mean, this is really simple. The last two presidents to submit and have balanced budgets were Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. And yet throughout, I mean, it was early in Carter's presidency, actually it was in Jerry Ford's presidency before Jimmy Carter, that Jude Wanniski rolled out his two Santa Claus theory, that Republicans should run up debt as hard and as fast as possible when they hold the White House, and then when Democrats get the White House, scream and yell bloody murder about the debt. Oh, the debt. It's so terrible. It's going to destroy us. Our children are going to have to pay for it. We can't deal with this. But they're still scratching their heads going, what's the deal? Oh, and then you got Trumpfrastructure, Trump's infrastructure scam. Yeah, we'll put out $200 billion and private companies are going to come in with $1.5 trillion. Isn't that nice? Well, how are you going to do that with things like sewer systems? I mean, you know, I get it that you can put a toll on a road and you can put a toll on a bridge, but there's a hell of a lot of stuff that we need that falls into the category of infrastructure that private corporations can't figure out a way to basically tax us by having us pay tolls to them for the next 100 years. And what private company is gonna want to build our infrastructure if they can't make more than it costs them? Which means, again, we get screwed. But hey, some for-profit companies that are big Republican contributors, they're gonna get trillions. This is nuts. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day. It's the next recession is really going to suck, writes Arthur Delaney over at Huffington Post. I'll tell you about this. And welcome back. Whoops. Oh, that's very strange. I'm getting weird messages from my printer. Anyhow, Jesse in Miami, Florida. Hey, Jesse, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. 1776, they had a revolution about tax inequality.
Arguably, yeah.
So I would like to relate it to today with wealth inequality. We got that past inequality because we didn't have no representation. And that rallying cry at that time. Today, I would see no difference between the reason it's such a wealth divide is because we have no representation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Jesse. And this is the thing that we see every time Republicans take over the economy is they pass legislation and policies like what I was just outlining that shred the social safety net, that reduce the access to resources or even wealth that poor and working poor people would have, and take that money and give it to the very, very rich in the form of tax cuts. And you know, and what that does is it exacerbates inequality. It makes the poor poorer, it makes the rich richer, and it makes those in the middle more likely to settle into poverty. And you know, this is a scam we've been seeing ever since Reagan. And it's what's astonishing is that, you know, you figured it out, I've figured it out. It's not like it's invisible or not obvious, and yet the media continues to pretend like, oh, isn't this fascinating that the Republicans are willing to do deficit spending? Ronald Reagan tripled the national debt. Are you kidding me? All Republicans do when there's a Republican in the White House is deficit spending. You know, it's like, give me a break. But anyhow, Jesse.
Well, you know, if we could connect that no representation and we have political representation and we still have a wealth divide, we got to connect it to, you know, we got to start putting our money where our mouth is. So if we keep saying we want representation and we keep giving it to people who don't, you know, it's counter to them for us to be represented. And they, as you say, they keep doing us in with this two Santa Claus stuff. You could say good cop or bad cop, but the system basically is economics, and we got to say, okay, you know, we could vote, but our vote is meaningless. It's not backed up by money. So we got to use our money to vote versus just a political vote. We need an economical vote.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, we need to be waking people up. And I think, you know, people are starting to wake up, and they're starting to realize that the Republicans have been running a 37-year scam, a long con, ever since the election of Reagan. And you know, a bunch of people have been in on it, you know, from Grover Norquist to Paul Ryan to Mitch McConnell, et cetera. You know, they know exactly what they're doing, and it's just now starting to dawn on the reporters in Washington, D.C., which is pretty bizarre. But yeah, spot on, Jesse. And my only concern is that if we start talking about taxation without representation, that, you know, our schools' civics classes are so non-existent. A lot of people aren't even going to realize that was a meme from the Revolutionary War. And B, what does representation mean? You know, I think there are a lot of the low-information voters, the people who listen to right-wing hate radio and watch Fox so-called news. They're not going to know what you're talking about. Or if they do, they're going to think that you're talking about something else. Jesse, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. The next recession is really going to suck, writes Arthur Delaney over at the Huffington Post. And this is fascinating because the Trumpistas, the Republicans, just released a budget which is going to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, food stamps. It's going to cut everything, right? It's, you know, just right across the board, hundreds of billions, trillions. $3 trillion in cuts over a 10-year period. $300 billion a year. And what that means is that during bad times, things are so much worse. One of the basic rules of economics and politics that the Republicans have broken this year is that when the economy's on a tear, when the stock market's up, when wages are up, when unemployment is down, when the economy is doing well, that's when you raise taxes, raise revenues, and you know, to the extent that you can, reduce spending. And typically you can when the economy is doing well because you're not spending as much on unemployment benefits, you're not spending as much on food stamps, you're not spending as much on aid to people because they have jobs. Right? When you've got full employment in your economy, your government expenditures go down. So during a time like this last couple of years have been, that is when the government should be raising taxes and squirreling away money, storing money for the winter that's going to come, which inevitably comes. Bull markets never last more than 7 to 9 years. And we're 9 years into one right now. Well, arguably 8 years, but still. You could say 9 years. So this bull market, when it ends, if the end of the market means that you're going to see a rise in unemployment, you're going to see a lowering of the employment rate, you're going to see more and more people out of work, you're going to see more people asking for workers' compensation or for unemployment benefits, you're going to see more people signing up for food stamps and for Medicaid at the exact same time that the Republicans are cutting $3 trillion out of those programs. And you now have some 20 states that are in the process of attempting to make unemployment insurance, which was put into place in the 1930s by Franklin Roosevelt, to make unemployment insurance a welfare program that you have to be drug tested to be eligible for. Plus, every week you have to prove that you have tried to get a certain number of places to hire you, even if you live in a place like Appalachia or, you know, some inner cities where there literally are no jobs. There's nobody hiring. You still have to pee in the cup. You still have to fill out the forms. You still have to jump through the hoops to get your, you know, average of what, $300 a week, more or less? Yeah, $330 to $350 per week is the average unemployment benefit. Now, this is the most robust of all the programs, unemployment insurance, that catches people when they fall out of employment as a result of an implosion of the economy. So this is the main thing that people who are not retired yet, people who are under 65, what people rely on to catch them when they fall. And instead of protecting people, well, here, this from this article, 9 states reduced benefit duration from the usual 26 weeks, just in the last year. Nine Republican-controlled states. As a result, the rate at which unemployed Americans receive layoff compensation overall has fallen from about 36% in 2007 to 28% in 2017. So almost 10% fewer people are even eligible now anymore because they're, quote, tightening up the rules. The main thing that they're doing is they're finding ways to kick unemployment people off the benefits after they've already been determined to be eligible. And the main thing that they do with that is, oh, you didn't pee in the cup this week, or oh, you didn't fill out the form saying that here's the 3 places or 6 places or whatever it is that you went to work. At the beginning, Arthur Delaney writes, at the beginning of last year, only 21 state trust funds had achieved what the Labor Department considers a minimum level of solvency. Remember I said during good times you stash the money away because the bad times will come? 21 states haven't even done that. If they don't catch up before layoffs hit, there'll be political pressure to follow a new path the other states have taken to reduce benefits. But Congress and the President are more interested in urine tests than unemployment insurance. Since about 2011, Republicans at the state and federal level have been trying to make drug tests a requirement for welfare, food stamps, and unemployment insurance. Wisconsin, Texas, and Mississippi have already passed drug test laws. In Florida, in order to file for unemployment, you have to take a math and reading test, plus you have to file online, which many people who are broke or unemployed don't have the resources to do. And as a result of that, people claiming unemployment benefits in Florida have dropped from 32% successful claims to 9%. Good luck. And it just goes on and on. You know, the alternative work arrangements. So many more people now are employed in the gig economy, whether it's Uber drivers or what, Sean, we're in a break, that it's just, you know, those people, if you're in the gig economy, if you're working for Uber or for TaskRabbit or something, you don't even qualify for unemployment insurance. It's a big new trend, right? We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back right after the break. We'll pick up your calls, and then I want to get into Scott Pruitt, too. It's just amazing what this guy is up to. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten thinks Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Schukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
Learn all about the Thom Hartmann podcast at thomhartmann.com/podcast. They're commercial free and you can listen anytime, any place you want.
Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. Dan in Villa Park, Illinois. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Well, you know, you're talking about all of these cuts to social good programs. I'm not going to call them welfare. We're helping out our neighbors, and that's a good thing.
Yep.
It's going to increase something that we don't measure, and that's the desperation index. Crime's going to go through the roof for people living on the edge.
Yep.
That's going to allow them to boost police, military budgets, and, of course, our friends in the private prison business will be making giant profits off the misery that was created. I was going to call it a law of unintended consequences, but I don't think they're unintended.
Yeah. Well, it's a good question. Do they actually intend these consequences, or do they just not care? And I suspect it's more that they just don't give a damn. They just want to take the money and run.
But they know when we say unintended, it's like, oh, that was a mistake, we'll fix it. That's why I won't use that term.
Oh, they're continuing to proclaim that everything's perfect. You know, this is exactly how it should be. You know, it's don't worry, be happy, trust us. You know, I'm a
59-year-old white guy who got dumped in the last recession, and those of us that were 45ish to 60 at that time have become absolute ghosts in this economy. And I tell the story. When the height of the recession was going, they couldn't discriminate people based on age, but because we were a huge segment of those thrown out of work, they could simply say those not employed currently need not apply. And what that did is it took all of us off the table.
Right.
And we could apply anyway, but it was going to get thrown out by a computer, or once it got through the computer, it was just going to be tossed. They weren't going to talk to us. Now, me personally, if I'm going to feed people, I don't want to feed people who just ate. I want to feed people who are hungry. But that's me. But what we're doing here is we're trying to make people desperate. Desperate people do desperate things, and then we put them in prison. And, then our 13th Amendment kicks in, and we don't get, we don't get to vote. And it just goes on, and it's all circular. So
Charles Blow,
that's all I have.
Yeah, Dan, you nailed it pretty well. Charles Blow wrote a piece in today's New York Times that is titled "GOP Visions of Tectonic Realignment," and I'm going to do a little more lengthy rant grounded in that piece for tomorrow's program. But essentially, he's pointing out what you're pointing out, that they're packing the courts. They've packed the Supreme Court. Mitch McConnell, violated every precedent, and I would say law. Violated the Constitution for a whole year to keep Merrick Garland off the Supreme Court, and instead put probably the most right-wing Supreme Court justice in our lifetimes on Neil Gorsuch, whose mom Ann just destroyed the Environmental Protection Agency during the was it Reagan administration or Nixon? I think it was Reagan.
Absolutely the most corporatist of all of them.
Yes.
If not,
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, this is what's going on, and you said it really well. Dan, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Well said. Barbara in St. Paul, Minnesota. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind?
Well, how are you doing today, Citizen Tom?
I am alive and kicking. What's up?
Well, praise the Lord for that. Just what you're talking about, economics.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching this comedian. He's very crude, so I can't use any of the language that he used.
Thank you.
But what he said made the most sense in the world. What they're doing is they're covering up what they're doing behind everybody's back and putting out this the husband's things and the abusive wives and Trump ain't this and Trump ain't that. We already know all this. This already we know. Let's push this aside. Let's stop giving Donald Trump and his cohorts credit for nothing. Let's stop it. Really. I hate to sound like I'm yelling, but I'm tired of hearing about it. There are still people in the streets that are looking for jobs. There are people in the streets that are about to lose their homes. There are people in the street that are about to be evicted from their apartments. They're cutting their Social Security. They're cutting their Medicare. All this has been going on for at least a year when Donald Trump first got in office. As for Donald Trump's budget, I don't think he wrote that budget. I'm going to sound stupid. I think it's that Stephen Miller.
Oh, yeah, and Mick Mulvaney.
Yeah, he hates America. He hates this country, and people need to find out why. And if you notice, everybody else is gone. Everybody else is gone. Everybody else is gone, but him.
Yeah. Yeah, and he's the white
What is he
supremacist
there
in
for?
chief, I think.
Beg your pardon?
I said I think Steve Miller is the white supremacist in chief. His inclinations and his leanings in that direction are, fairly obvious to me. I think it's
yeah, it's
this
it's scary. I'm not scared because as a person of African American heritage, we know how to take a little, and do what we have to do with it, stretch it as far as we can, even we possibly stretch it. But there are people that don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and Trump
is going to kill people to eat. There are people that's going to kill people to have clothes on them. It's going to be very, very scary. So let's have a war with Iran and take people's mind off that. Maybe the unemployed youth that are wandering the streets that don't have nothing to do, maybe they'll join the service and we'll have more people to fight in our army. Right. This is what this is all about, and people are not paying attention. The folks that voted for Trump are going to get dumped on, and they're going to get dumped on heavily.
Yeah, absolutely. And except for the Make America White Again part, and that's the core of Trump's immigration policy. And he's saying to the Democrats, yeah, no problem. I'll even legalize the dreamers, even a million of them. I'll give you more than you already have. But in exchange for that, we want to block immigration, legal immigration into the United States by people coming from basically predominantly people of color countries. And
to sit back and live in one of the greatest countries on earth. People don't get me wrong. We have to fight. We have to struggle. We have struggles here in this country. This is one of the greatest countries on earth. I said one of the greatest countries on earth. But we need to start voting with our pocketbooks and not with our thoughts about, okay, the black man was in office and we don't need a woman in office. And it's starting to get really silly.
Yep.
And the stuff that's going on, and I'm going to hurry get done, Tom, because you got other people. You run out of stuff to think about, and you run out of stuff to say. I can't keep expressing it more and more and more. Citizens, read up and see what the word citizen means. Right. Martin Luther King was a citizen. John Kennedy was a citizen. Barack Obama was a citizen. All these men were citizens.
Yeah.
And they care about you and me.
Yeah, and Donald Trump is a troll. Barbara, I do have to move along, but thank you for your call. Very, very well said. Chris in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom? I just wanted to give you a little brief history of my Social Security disability. Trying to get it, that is. I've been off work for 2 years.
I understand 2 years is about the average period of time it takes to get Social Security disability.
They are 22 months behind schedule, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm a fourth-generation steel worker. I've got 30 years in the mill. I can't work anymore. I mean, even just the scripts, I'm unhireable. But they just play it out and play it out and play it out. And it makes it impossible for people. I mean, I'm looking at losing a house, losing a car, losing a wife, and you've got poor people out there now that are giving up, and while I still have life insurance, what should I do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we should not have to think like that as Americans.
I agree. I agree.
I'm a fourth generation steel worker in this country, and we're the only steel company that still makes armor plate in this country.
Yeah.
That's scary.
Yep.
That's scary.
But that's not just me. I just wanted to.
But this is Chris. This is what they. I mean, one of the reasons why this budget also has a multi-$100 million cut to the administration of the Social Security office is because they want that 22 months that it takes you to process your Social Security disability claim. They want that to become 36 months or 48 months. They want you to give up or die after a couple of years of trying to get your Social Security disability.
And that's what they want. They hope that I die before I get it.
Right, and pretty soon they're going to be doing the same thing to people just wanting to get Social Security. Right now you got to show up in the month before you turn 65. Pretty soon it's going to be you got to show up 6 months before you turn 65 because it's going to take that long to process the forms because they had to lay off another 5,000 Social Security employees or whatever it is. Right. Chris, this is their game plan. Break it and then yell about how it's broken and how Citibank can come in and run it better. I got to move along, but Chris, thank you for the call. Corky in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, what's up?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, they don't understand economics, do they?
Because
you think
they're just grabbing everything they can get. Anything that's not nailed down, these Republicans are going to try and grab for themselves and for their billionaire patrons.
they're making the perfect storm.
Of course.
Because you take money away from people. You cut their Social Security and make it so difficult they can't get it. And then you cut back
a $400 billion cut to Medicare? That's breathtaking.
Yeah, and you make it possible to buy guns that much easier.
Yeah.
Now, what you're doing is you're devastating a population financially, and then you make it easier for them to get guns. Here comes the perfect storm.
Yeah.
What does a desperate man do? You know, the guys in the foxholes in Vietnam, when they were being overrun, they didn't sit there and die. They jumped up and ran at the enemy and killed as many as they could.
Yeah.
These guys do not understand what a perfect storm is. When you make people destitute and they've got no hope.
Yeah, and Trump's only message, his only answer is, yeah, Ivanka and I are going to continue making our crap in China, and you know, if you don't like it, eat cake. You know, it's like, let them eat cake, and that worked out real well for Marie Antoinette, didn't it? Corky, thank you for the call. Not that I would recommend a guillotine, but perhaps a political one, you know, the political equivalent. You know, off with their office. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Mark, watching Free Speech TV in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, thanks for watching. What's on your mind?
I can't be the only one that finds this offer from Walmart to Rachel Brand that's supposed to be so phenomenal you can't turn it down. The timing of it to be quite suspicious.
Oh, yeah. My guess on that, first of all, for people who don't know what we're talking about, Rachel Brand is the person who is one step down the ladder from Rod Rosenstein, and whose name is always pronounced Rosenstein on the Fox News Network and Right Wing Hate Radio, but it's Rosenstein. I think they're trying to make it sound even more Jewish, right? Just like they say Democrat Party rather than Democratic Party. And so if Rosenstein gets fired, Rachel Brand would have been the one to step in, and she was inclined to maintain the investigation. She is a nonpartisan, but the person behind her, the Solicitor General of the United States, is a right-wing hack. He's a all-in Trump right-wing hack. So if they can get rid of Rachel Brand, then, and I'm sorry I'm forgetting his name, but the right-wing hack guy then becomes the one who replaces Rod Rosenstein when Rosenstein gets fired or lays off or quits or whatever, and then he will, you know, kill the Mueller investigation. This is the Saturday Night Live or the Saturday Night Massacre that Richard Nixon did in slow motion. That's what's going on, Mark. Oh, and there's no doubt in my mind that somebody in the White House picked up the phone and talked to their good friends over at Walmart and said, hey, you know, if you offered this woman $1 million a year paycheck as, you know, a lawyer on your legal team, we would be very grateful.
Oh, sure.
You know.
And Walmart benefits heavily from Trump being in office.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of pony back on Corky's call, these guys might be unleashing something they have no idea, because I agree with Corky. If you make a huge part of the populace so desperate that they figure they got nothing to lose, that's when revolution starts. Yeah.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And this is the essence of my book, The Crash of 2016, is what happens when the collision of this, you know, basically Republican economic takeover that started in the 70s with the Powell memo and, you know, of the country, collides with a massive Great Depression type economic event. And my belief is that when those two things happen, you have a country that is ripe for revolution, not necessarily a violent revolution, but certainly a political revolution. And that's what we saw in 1932, the last time it happened. It's what we saw in 1856, the last time there was a major depression. followed by a war, the Civil War. It's what happened in 1770 when there was a major worldwide depression, followed by the American Revolution in 1776. Roughly every 80 years this happens, and it's been 80 years since the great crash in 29.
I'll put forth this idea, though, that if we had something like the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine, where we actually clogged the streets and shut them down like they did, you do that, you shut down Wall Street for 3 days, they'll be shooting people to open it back up.
Could be. You know, I mean, you know, look at Kent State. They were shooting people.
Exactly, and that didn't cost them billions of dollars every day they were shut down.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're onto it, Mark, and this is the Walmart thing. Yeah, it smells terrible, and I agree with you, Mark. Thanks for the call. Thanks a lot, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. So, John in Sparks, Nevada. Hey, John, you're on the air. What's on your mind today?
Well, this is a historic note. I'm not an economic historian, but on my reading of economic history, October of 1929, I think on the 28th of October or something like that, was Black Tuesday.
That's right.
And that's often given as a date for the beginning of the Great Depression. Now, there was Black Wednesday and Thursday during the previous week.
Yep.
But Black Tuesday has always been, in my mind, the single day of the greatest drop on Wall Street. Now, a week ago today, February 5th, just this morning on some other program, somebody was talking about February 5th being historically the greatest drop in the Dow.
Well, yes and no. It's the greatest drop in terms of points, but the Dow is at 24,000 roughly now, and the Dow back in the 1930s was at like 340. You know, and so if it lost 40 points, that was like, you know, 15% drop.
Considerable drop. Okay, thank you for explaining that to me, because I couldn't figure out. Now,
percentage-wise, the crash of 29
that Black Tuesday. Black Tuesday, even if it wasn't the greatest drop in numbers, it was a big drop in percentage.
That's correct.
And it seems to me it would be good for us, for news commentators, when they talk about February 5th of this year being the greatest drop in history, they ought to compare it to Black Tuesday in October 1929.
Yeah, I agree. And people don't get it. People don't understand, and it's unfortunate. We have, you know, economic illiteracy and political illiteracy are widespread in this country, and I lay a lot of the blame for that at the defunding of our public schools, starting with Reaganomics, and with the deregulation of our media, to the point that the only thing that any media corporation cares about anymore is profitability. And you know, there used to be
3 months or something, as measured on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, exactly. What's the next quarter going to do? John well said. Thank you for the call. Ward in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Ward, thanks for listening to 1350 AM. What's up?
Yeah, hi, Tom. At the beginning of the year, the Albuquerque Journal had an article, you know, fax paper, bottom of the paragraph, and the guy stated that basically the 1% now owns 40% of the wealth in this country. And that's basically double what the bottom 90% owns. So,
well, here's the this is a quote from Bernie, but it's been tested by Snopes, right? So he said, today the top 1% owns 41.8% of the financial wealth of America. The bottom 60% owns all of 1.7%. So the top 1% owns 42% roughly. The bottom 60% of all of America owns a little less than 2%. And then he goes on to say, in fact, the top 1/10 of 1% of Americans owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90% of the American people.
Yeah, and so my question is, why the heck are the 90% paying any sales tax, property tax, or income tax? Just take them off the tax.
Yeah, you broke up pretty badly. Did you just say, Ward, why are the bottom 90% continuing to pay their taxes?
Yeah, That's sales tax, property tax, income tax.
Well, because you have no choice. You know, if you're a billionaire, you hire an army of lawyers to do your taxes and find all kinds of tax loopholes that are literally only available to really rich people. But if you only make under a couple $100,000 a year, I mean, and certainly if you're making less than, if you're a median household in America, if you're making $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year, somewhere in that neighborhood, you can't afford to do that. If you've refused to pay your taxes, you go to jail.
Well, my point being, why don't the progressive Democrats run on no taxes for the lower 90%? I mean, the Republicans just gave the 1% a huge tax break,
right?
And the progressives would win, and we could get the infrastructure and Medicare for all.
The reason not to run on that, Ward, the reason not to run on that is that it's a Republican meme. It plays right into the whole Republican worldview. Frankly, I think that what progressives and Democrats should be saying is it's time to raise our taxes back up to 74%, where they were before Reagan came into office. That worked really well. When the top tax rate is above 50% in any country for any period of longer than a decade, what you see almost immediately is the middle class starts to grow and the economy stabilizes. When you get the top tax rate below 50%, and keep in mind, it only hits people when they earn more than $3 million a year, roughly in today's dollars. When you get that below 50%, what happens is that economic instability increases and the wealth gap increases radically, which is what we've seen in the last 37 years since Reagan. So
I get that, but how did the Democrats win? That's the point.
It's very simple. You say it's time to tax the rich.
Well, yeah, but there's so many people that think they're going to be.
The rich do not have that big a constituency, Ward, and this sales job that Reagan did, that if you help the rich, it's going to work to your benefit. It's a variation on the old 19th century horse and sparrows routine that you feed the horse oats, and then the horse's digestive system's not entirely efficient, so the sparrows can pick out undigested oats from the horse's poop. That was the version of trickle-down economics that was sold in the 1880s by conservatives. It was called the horse and sparrow theory. The government should help the rich people, and the rich people will help everybody else. Now they call it trickle-down economics. I call it trickle-on economics. It produces a nation of peons, right? And we're being peed on and told that it's raining. In fact, we're being told that it's raining money, which is BS. It's just not the case. But
trickle-up economics.
Yeah, but I think that it's what I'd like to see is a tax system like they have in many of the Scandinavian and Northern European countries, where at the end of the year when your taxes are due, you get an invoice from the government that breaks out every penny of your tax bill and where that money went. This much went to welfare, this much went to the military, this much went to schools, this much went to construction, this much went to the administration of government, whatever it may be. It breaks it out, and have the government do your taxes for you. In most countries, there is no tax-preparing industry for anybody except the super rich. The average person does not need a tax-preparing industry. But the tax-preparing industry makes billions of dollars a year on the complexity of our tax code, and they're lobbying to keep it complex, which is nuts. And then Republicans run on the campaign of, we're going to reduce it down to a postcard. Isn't that wonderful? Trump even claimed he was going to do that. Well, of course they're not going to do that. The billionaires in the tax-preparing industry are not going to let them do that. Ward, thanks for the call. Interesting and important point you raised. We're going to get into the rest of the corruption of the Trump administration here, starting with Mr. Pruitt right after the break. Stick around. Coming up on the top of the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Free Trade Doesn't Work, What Should Replace It and Why by Ian Fletcher. This is from the introduction, which is titled Why We Can't Trust the Economists. America's trade, the book, by the way, was written, I think, around 2010 or 11. America's trade deficit, $696 billion in 2008, $701 billion in 2007, and a world record $760 billion in 2006. Even if it's fallen by half in 2009, a temporary plunge we've seen in past recessions that probably doesn't signify underlying improvement, a $370 billion trade deficit is still astronomical by any reasonable historical standard. To be fair, the trade deficit is not a perfect indicator of free trade's cost. A nation can always balance its trade by crude measures like forcing down wages by political fiat. So hypothetically, we could have a small deficit and a large trade problem. Plenty of impoverished third world nations have balanced trade, and a single year's deficit means nothing. But with numbers this high, our deficit is obviously a big problem, if it's a problem at all. And yet Americans remain afraid to do anything about it. The dangers of protectionism are notorious, and questioning free trade in an intellectually serious way runs into deep waters of economics very fast. So we remain paralyzed in the face of crisis. Over the last 20 years, Americans have brought over $6 trillion, that's trillion with a T, more from the world, bought more from the world than we have sold back to it. That's over $20,000 per American. Ironically, if the U.S. were a developing country, our deficits would have reached the 5% level that the International Monetary Fund takes as the benchmark of financial crisis. The U.S. economy has ceased generating any net new jobs in internationally traded sectors in either manufacturing or services. The comforting myth persists that America is shifting from low-tech to high-tech employment, but we are not. We're losing jobs in both and shifting to non-trade services, which are mostly low-value added and thus ill-paid jobs. According to the Commerce Department, all our net new jobs are in categories such as security guards, waitresses, and the like. The vaunted new economy has not contributed a single net new job to America in this century. Not one. The alchemy of international finance that lets America run a seemingly infinite overdraft against the rest of the world looks suspicious too, because that's what it means to endlessly import more than we export. But where does the money come from at the end of the day? Can we really get something for nothing forever? Or are we in for another crisis like the 2008 financial crisis? Subprime mortgages looked too good to be true, and then they blew up. The aftershocks are still hitting us. Is trade going to be the next shoe to drop? Common sense seems to say that American workers are going to have problems when we trade with nations such as China and India, where the average wage is $1 an hour or less. Corporate America even admits with barely concealed glee that competition from foreign labor has American workers pinned. As one Goodyear vice president put it, quote, "Until we get real wage levels down much closer to those of the Brazils and Koreas, we cannot pass along productivity gains to wages and still be competitive," end quote. Brazil? Korea? Our wages? These nations and others are booming as exporters to the United States, but they remain far too poor to take back enough of our exports to balance our trade. Their combination of dreadful wages and regulatory standards on the one hand and winning economic strategies on the other had so far produced nothing like the living standards needed to make them significant importers of American goods. Despite recent decades of economic growth, there are still over 1 billion people in Asia earning less than $2 a day. Working conditions are the flip side of low pay in developing countries. Production methods long ago abandoned in the developed world, many of them dangerous and environmentally unsound, are still widely in use. In India, for example, foundry workers often don't wear socks, shoes, protective headgear, earplugs, or even eye protection. Often wearing no more than boxer shorts, they squat on the floor next to roaring furnaces. Charles Dickens has moved to Asia. The environment is threatened also. Thousands of foundries in China run on industrial-grade coke with no pollution control devices in their smokestacks, creating a plume of smoke that stretches across the Pacific on satellite photos. Chlorofluorocarbons are banned in the United States, but still used in China as a blowing agent for the production of polyurethane foam cushions and the like, providing a significant cost advantage for Chinese manufacturers. None of this happens by accident. Foreign governments treat trade as war and use, and use every trick in the book, legal and illegal under international agreements, to grab their industries a competitive advantage. And even when they don't cheat, they are often more skilled in cultivating their industries than we are. Toyota somehow didn't go bankrupt when GM did. All these facts impinge upon America because of free trade. But economists keep telling us everything will be fine. According to them, free trade is good for us, and they can prove it. 93% of American economists surveyed support free trade. This inescapably raises the question of whether they've been doing their jobs or whether America should stick with the policy that they've recommended. This is a book about real-world economic problems, brutally real problems. But it's also a book about economic theory, because in economics, raw facts don't mean much without a theory to interpret them. This is especially true for parts of economics that are as controversial and theoretically unsettled as trade. Wrong theories helped get America into its current trade mess, so we need to get the right theories to get us out of it. Not only theories, of course, but we won't be able to do without them. Can't we just find a practical solution? That's the instinct of many Americans who find economic theory abstruse and often baffling. Unfortunately, not. Free trade doesn't work. And we're basically dream is the book.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The Guardian is reporting this, Dana Nuccicelli writing just an extraordinary headline. The EPA debunked Administrator Pruitt's latest climate misinformation. Scott Pruitt, another cokehead, right-wing congressional troll that has made his way into the Trump administration, is now the head of the Environmental Protection Agency. And living high on the hog, by the way. We'll get to that in just a moment. And he did a radio interview last week where he says he doesn't know with precision what's causing global warming. He says our activity contributes to the climate change to a certain degree. Now, measuring that with precision, I think, is more challenging than is let on at times. Really? Why is it that the world scientists don't have the difficulty that you have, Scott Pruitt? Oh, that's right. Their entire political career hasn't been funded by petro-billionaires. Dana Nuccicelli writes, here's what the EPA website said about that a year ago, before Pruitt got hold of it as part of the Trump administration's systematic deletion of government climate change websites. Quote, this is what the EPA's website used to say before cokehead Trump came along. Research indicates that natural causes do not explain most observed warming, especially warming since the mid-20th century. Rather, it is extremely likely that human activities have been the dominant cause of that warming. The IPCC went on to conclude with 95% confidence that humans are the main cause of global warming since 1950. Then Pruitt lies again. He says, I think there's an assumption that because the climate is warming, that is necessarily a bad thing. Like, gee, scientists don't think this is so bad. I mean, you know, it's kind of cold in Michigan in the winter. Wouldn't it be nice if it was a degree or two warmer? Well, no, because this warming rapidly doesn't just warm everything. It makes weather go to extremes. So we now have extreme cold in Washington, D.C. in the winter, extreme heat in the summer, not just Washington, D.C., but, you know, I lived there for 7 years. I know what it was like. And it's not, this is not a matter of assumptions, by the way, as Dana Nuccicelli writes in the Guardian. It's a conclusion supported by a vast body of scientific research. For example, here's what the EPA said before Pruitt took it down. Quote, scientific studies indicate that extreme weather events such as heat waves and large storms are likely to become more frequent or more intense with human-induced climate change. It's the Environmental Protection Agency itself, the nation's scientists, saying this. Of course, Scott Pruitt has taken that off their websites. And then he goes on to say, you know, not only want to not be so bad, but, you know, hey, a warmer world might just be a wonderful thing for humans. We did really well when the world was warm before. Well, actually, not so much. Here's what Pruitt said. He said, is it an existential threat? Is it something that's unsustainable? Or what kind of effect or harm is this going to have? We know that humans have flourished during times of, what, warming trends? Do we know what the ideal surface temperature should be, the year 2100 or the year 2018? It's fairly arrogant for us to think we know exactly what it should be in 2100. Well, the one thing we do know it should be in 2100, if we want to still have, you know, civilization, is stable. It's stability in temperature that has allowed the agricultural revolution to happen. We've had a stable environment for about 10 or 11,000 years. Prior to that, it was hot, cold, you know, sea levels going up and down, all kinds of things were changing for reasons that had nothing to do with man-made climate change, but they were changing, and not as rapidly as now, by the way. But they were changing, and they drove people in and out of areas. I mean, you know, into Europe, out of Europe, you know, kill off the Neanderthals, et cetera, et cetera. And then toward the end of the interview, Pruitt, as Dana writes, let slip his allegiance to the fossil fuel industry. This is Scott Pruitt speaking. Renewables need to be part of our energy mix, but to think that's going to be the dominant fuel or dominant energy source on how we generate electricity, I think it's simply fanciful. There was a declared war on coal. The EPA was weaponized against certain sectors of our economy, fossil fuels generally, and that's not the role of a regulator. That's such BS. The EPA was not weaponized. The job of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, is to protect the environment. And coal damages the environment. In fact, the Clean Air Act, which was, you know, the Supreme Court just recently said, yes, the Clean Air Act does mandate that the EPA regulate carbon dioxide. This is the law. And then he says, you know, we can't do it. Sorry. Well, Hawaii is going to be 100% renewable by 2045. California and New York, 50% renewable by 2030. And California is going to hit that goal by 2020. Then Pruitt lies again. He says, Paris was a bad business deal for this country. It was not about CO2 reduction. If it was about CO2 reduction, they would not have let China and India take until 2030 to reduce their CO2 footprint. That's, again, a lie. Scott Pruitt, the cokehead administrator of the EPA. All you have to do, you know, all we would have to do to hit our targets was just keep doing exactly what we're doing. Paris, in addition to being non-binding, really didn't have that much impact on the United States. And China has actually pledged a more aggressive, you know, climate mitigation effort than they agreed to in Paris. And they're doing it, by the way. Pruitt seems to think, Dana Nuccicelli writes for The Guardian, seems to think his job is to maximize fossil fuel industry profits. Sorry. He's not in charge of Koch Industries. His job is to protect human and environmental health, and it's hard to imagine anyone doing a job any worse. Well, there is something he does quite well, Scott Pruitt. He travels in luxury. This from Daniel Alperin and Brady Dennis in today's Washington Post, or Saturday's Washington Post. On Monday, June 5th, accompanied by his personal security detail, Pruitt settled into his $1,600 first-class seat for a short flight from D.C. to New York. Now, you could take the train ride for $200, and it's about the same amount of time when you consider going through security and everything. Or you can fly coach for $200, but Scott Pruitt, $1,600 a year taxpayer money. That Wednesday, after traveling with Trump on Air Force One for an infrastructure event in Cincinnati, Pruitt and several staffers raced to New York on a military jet at the cost of $36,000. From there, he caught a plane to Rome. The transatlantic flight was part of a round-trip ticket for Pruitt that cost $7,000. In Rome, Pruitt got private tours of the Vatican and met with papal officials. In total, a taxpayer-funded trip for travel for Pruitt and his top aides during that stretch in early June cost at least $90,000. This guy who's doing nothing but suck up to and do the bidding of the petro-billionaires in the fossil fuel industry is living high on the hog, just like the billionaire funders who own him. That figure does not account for the cost of Pruitt's round-the-clock security detail, which have not been disclosed. So it's even worse than we know. Last year, Pruitt promoted U.S. natural gas exports in Morocco. This year, he plans to travel to Israel, Australia, Japan, Mexico, and possibly Canada. All, of course, will be, you know, on a flatbed seat costing $7,000 to $8,000 a pop that we're paying for. Wherever Pruitt's schedule takes him, he often flies first or business class, citing unspecified security concerns. Right. He's so worried. The environmentalists are going to get him. In a 2-day period of last July, 2 days, he spent $4,400 for separate round trips to Birmingham and Atlanta. On at least 4 occasions, he spent between $2,000 and $2,600 on first-class airfare to official meetings or tours near Tulsa. Guess what's in Tulsa? His home. Yes, you're paying for first-class trips to Tulsa for Scott Pruitt so he can visit his house. His other first-class trips include a $4,600 round-trip itinerary to Salt Lake City, Minneapolis, and Little Rock to promote the unraveling of an Obama administration water regulation. Then he made stops in Colorado, Iowa, North Dakota, and Texas, cost $10,800. He gave a keynote address at the Heritage Foundation. That trip cost you and me $3,000. It just goes on and on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Plus, he's keeping all his travel on Delta Airlines, fare be damned, so that he can jack up all those frequent flyer miles to travel to fly his family around for free. And welcome back. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, and it needs, you know, people need to be reminded of this. Our Constitution thinks of all people as having due process, that they have the right to due process. And, you know, ICE has been violating that, you know, since the Trump administration has been in charge repeatedly. And
the Constitution does not say citizens; it says persons.
Yeah,
and the Fifth through the Ninth or through the Eighth Amendments are the essence of this.
Right, and it's been supported also by Supreme Court decisions. And so, you know, it's actually ended up that people have been denied due process they're supposed to if they feel that they are going to be harmed by being deported. Oh, I guess I got cut off.
No, you're still on, John.
Oh, okay. It was so quiet. You know, that you know, if they get deported, they would be harmed. We're supposed to then allow them due process so that they can make their case. Right. And there have been a number of people that have died as a result of ICE agents not reminding them of that and then just going ahead and deporting them back to say, I know of one case where a woman apparently was murdered by her husband, and she knew that if she went back to Mexico, that is what would happen to her. And there have been a few cases like that. So this kind of thing should not happen. But I think that a lot of people think that our democracy and the rights and privileges of it are only for citizens or only for people of this country. But that is not the case, and it has not been the case of our involvement in the United Nations and other institutions that, you know, people have human rights throughout the whole world.
Yep.
They need to, you know, have those and be protected. So.
Yeah, and ICE has been at the front of the list of organizations abusing that. And, you know, now they're starting to get a little bit of pushback. You've got this this professor was it in Michigan, who was just, you know, arrested and deported right in front of his kids.
Yeah.
You know, and there's some pushback on that. I mean, I think that they're starting to overstep. And frankly, I think that's been going on since the middle of the Obama administration.
Right. Yeah, and I just also wanted to say, economically, this is going to really impact us negatively because businesses are going to be closing as a result. Now, I know it's not right for them to hire illegal people, but it's a fact of, that in certain industries they do.
Yeah.
And there have been cases right here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where a business had to close as a result of having an ICE raid. And then I've heard of in Pacific County, Washington, the BBC did a documentary on that in certain industries, the fishing industry, I think mainly.
Sure. Well, but those industries are ultimately going to have to recalibrate themselves back to a reasonable pay scale. But my big concern on this, John, is that you've got 10, 11 million people in this country who right now are consumers, right? They're buying things. They're paying taxes and they're buying things. And if you throw them out of the country, you've lost a good chunk of our GDP. I mean, you want to throw this country into a recession, all you have to do is cut the purchasing power of 11 million people in half by, denying them employment or deporting them from the country, or cut their purchasing power even far more than that. And, and then you've got a really serious problem. John, I got a boogie, but thank you for the call. Excellent points all. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Grants to help fight hate. This is, just the ongoing bizarre stuff that's going on inside the Trump administration. First of all, we're seeing Rachel Brand, now the person underneath Rod Rosenstein, referred to as Rosenstein on Fox News and right-wing hate media, because I guess because it sounds more Jewish, right? Just like they're doing Joe McCarthy's old thing of never refer to the Democratic Party as the Democratic Party, because Democratic sounds really nice. Everybody loves Democratic. Instead, call them the Democrat Party and emphasize the rat. And it's bizarre how these guys. But in any case, Rod Rosenstein, his number two, or the person directly under, the person who would replace him if Trump were to succeed in firing him, was Rachel Brand. And she was inclined to continue the Trump-Russia investigation. The person under her, the Solicitor General, who was Robert Bork in the Nixon administration, is kind of a Robert Bork-like character who is, all in for Trump, right-wing Republican. So, maybe somebody at the White House made a call to somebody at Walmart saying, hey, would you like to offer Rachel $1 million a year to get her out of our, will no one rid me of this quarrelsome priest? It wasn't pesky, was it? Quarrelsome, tiresome, whatever. It's been a long time since I read Shakespeare, but that's what's going on. And so you've got that happening at the same time that the Obama administration is doubling down on let's cut white supremacist and violent white supremacist terrorists a pass. Let's cut them a pass. Let's give them a break. Let's, no problem here. Ron Nixon and Eileen Sullivan, writing for the New York Times. This was actually last summer, but this is ongoing. This is from August 15th. The headline, Revocation of Grants to Help Fight Hate Under New Scrutiny After Charlottesville. The reason I'm sharing this older story with you is because there's a newer story that I'm going to follow it up with by Callie Holloway out of Alternet. The alt-right has killed far more people than you likely are aware of. And Callie is pointing out there's a new study from the Southern Poverty Law Center. More than 100 people have been killed or injured by alleged perpetrators influenced by the so-called alt-right, a movement that continues to access the mainstream and reach young recruits. These are quotes from the report. The SPLC report tracks the rise in alt-right related violence beginning in 2014 when 22-year-old Elliot Rodger murdered 6 people and injured 14 others in Isla Vista, California. Like many alt-right adherents, Rodger's radicalization began in men's rights forums, which helped stoke his racism, his misogyny, and his self-loathing. The story identifies 13 killers who have collectively killed 43 people and injured 67 others. The most conspicuous unifying background trait, the Southern Poverty Law Center writes, among these individuals is, quote, a history of consuming and or participating in the far-right, in the type of far-right ecosystem that defines the alt-right. And then they go through all the details of all these people. I'll get back to this in just a second. But in the meantime, back to August, days before leaving office in January, the Obama administration announced it was awarding $400 grand to a Chicago-based organization dedicated to combating right-wing domestic extremists. Jay Johnson, then the Homeland Security Secretary, singled out the work of the group Life After Hate when the announcement was made. He praised this group. But days later, the incoming Trump administration reversed course and stopped the grant, this $400,000 grant to Life After Hate. Christian Piccolini, who is the founder of the group, a former skinhead, who founded this group to help skinheads and Nazis wake up and become productive members of society. He says, we never got an explanation for why our grant was rescinded. But a former government official with knowledge of the grant said it was revoked in response to Twitter posts critical of Trump by Mr. Piccolini. Brilliant. A 2015 survey of nearly 400 law enforcement officials by the Center on Terrorism and Homeland Security at Duke University found that anti-government violent extremists, including white supremacist groups, were, quote, the most severe threat of political violence that we face, end of quote. The FBI issued a report and found that white supremacists have been responsible for 49 homicides in 26 attacks over the past 16 years, more than any other domestic extremist movement. They are here. They are coming after us. Nicholas Giampa, who in December murdered his ex-girlfriend's parents before killing himself, was, quote, an enthusiastic supporter of then-candidate Donald Trump, who often used racist slurs to attack Trump's critics. Charlottesville killer James Alex Field's social media pages are reportedly filled with Trump and Pepe memes. Sean Urbanski, the alleged killer of U.S. Army Lieutenant Richard Collins III, quote, apparently liked memes about Donald Trump, white supremacy, and the alt-right. Alexander Bissonnette, a Quebec mosque murderer and the lone Canadian in the group, was reportedly an avid supporter of both Trump and Marine Le Pen. Former Breitbart intern Lane Davis stabbed his father to death a little over a year before he wrote a rap ode to Trump he posted on YouTube. 9 of the attacks cataloged by the Southern Poverty Law Center occurred in the shadow of the Trump presidency, leading the organization to cite 2017 as the most violent year of the alt-right's existence thus far. And they are exploding on college campuses. After this 2009 DHS report on right-wing terrorism that the Obama administration pulled over because people on Fox freaked out, they shut down the extremism and radical branch at DHS.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're not even going to look at white fundamentalist right-wing terrorists. We're not even going to look at them, even though they cause more deaths than any other group. Thom Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Ralph Nader's most recent book, Breaking Through Power. It's Easier Than We Think. This is from the first chapter. It's titled Plutocracy of Maximums, Democracy of Minimums. When I was a student at Princeton University, I learned from my anthropology studies the concentration of power in the hands of a few is common to all cultures, societies, nations, tribes, cities, towns, and villages. Even where the thirst for self-governance and democracy is strong, as was the case in New England towns before the American Revolution against King George III, wealthy Tories were there too. In central and western Massachusetts, the farmers used the term the river gods to describe the rich merchants using the Connecticut River as a possible profitable trading route. These days, most people protesting for economic justice use the term the 1% to describe the ultra-small group of people who wield enormous influence over our society today. There is something about the differences in skill, determination, lineage, avarice, and pure luck that stratifies most people from the rulers who dominate them. In the political realm, the few become dominant because they hoard wealth and are driven to exercise power over others. When a small group rules a society, the political system is considered an oligarchy. And when only money and wealth determine how a society is controlled, the political system is a plutocracy. From the standpoint of a democratic society, both oligarchy and plutocracy are inherently unjust and corrupt. Of course, there are variations in the degrees of authoritarianism and cruelty that each system exercises over the communities it relies on for workers and wealth. Scholars have resorted to using phrases like benign dictatorship or wise rules or paternalistic hierarchies to describe lighter touches by those few who impose their rule over the many. Thomas Paine simply called them tyrannies. People, families, and communities can only take so much abuse before they rise up to resist. The job of the rulers is always to find that line and provide the lowest level of pay, security, housing, consumer protection, healthcare, and political access for society so that they can extract and hoard the greatest amount of wealth, power, and immunity from justice for themselves. In many ways, the majority of Americans live in a democracy of minimums, while the privileged few enjoy a plutocracy of maximums. This small volume is not just about the ravages of power or the assaults against disadvantaged and downtrodden communities. The subject here is the dominating influence of the 1% in business, politics, health, education, and society as a whole. Over the past 50 years, Americans have suffered the relentless commercialization of everyday life, their privacy and their childhoods, their parks and prisons, their public budgets and foreign policy, their schools and religious institutions, their elections and governments, and the most basic societal institutions of them all, the family. Consider all the family functions that have been outsourced to business. Eating, cleaning, childcare, counseling, therapy, entertainment, sports, lawn work, simple repairs have been increasingly commercialized, commodified, packaged, and marketed back to us as products of luxury and convenience. Even mother's breast milk has been displaced by infant formula. In a plutocracy, commercialism dominates far beyond the realm of economics and business. Everything is for sale, and money is power. But in an authentic democracy, there must be commercial-free zones where the power of human rights, citizenship, community, equality, and justice are free from the corrupting influence of money. Our elections and our governments should be such commercial-free zones. Our environment, air, and water should never fall under the control of corporations or private owners. Children should not be programmed by a huckstering economy where their vulnerable consciousness becomes the target of relentless corporate marketing and advertising. American history demonstrates that whenever commerce dominates all aspects of national life, a host of ills and atrocities have not just festered and spread, but become normal. Enslavement, land grabs, war, ethnic cleansing, serfdom, child labor, abusive working conditions, corrupt political systems, environmental contamination, and immunity from the law for the privileged few. History also shows that whenever there have been periods when enough of the country organizes and resists, we see movements of people and communities breaking through power. Progress is made, rights are won, education and literacy increase, oppression is diminished. It was in this manner the people of conscience abolished the living nightmare imposed by the laws and whips of white enslavers. The nation moved closer to promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We won more control over our work, our food, our land, our air, and our water. Women secured the right to vote. Civil rights were elevated and enforced. Public schools, improved environments, workplace collective bargaining, and consumer protections did not spontaneously evolve. They were won by people demanding them and breaking through power. These moments of great progress are expressed in terms of new legislation, regulations, and judicial decisions that directly benefit life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book, Breaking Through Power, by Ralph Nader. Welcome back. Ron in Berrien Springs, Michigan. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Tom, today is Abraham Lincoln's birthday, and I'd like to relate a little Abraham Lincoln story, if I could. 1861, February 23rd, that's when Abraham Lincoln was supposed to have been assassinated in Baltimore before his inauguration in March. And it was Alan Pinkerton. There was two New York detectives who were also working on the case from their leads, and one Army general. But Abraham Lincoln was spirited through another depot and avoided the mob attack, which was supposed to attack him in the depot and kill him.
So he knew this was coming?
Yes, he did.
And Pinkerton was a good guy to stop it or a bad guy to facilitate it?
No. Alan Pinkerton was one of the main people who stopped it.
Okay.
And
cool.
Alan Pinkerton, this is from the book The Hour of Peril.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Pinkerton was also an ardent abolitionist. 2 years prior to this incident, 1859, March 11, John Brown came to Alan Pinkerton's house in Chicago on Adams Street at 4:30 in the morning. And John Brown had 11 people he was bringing out of slavery from Missouri. And their history of abolitionists has a long history. And they were comrades in arms. And through Alan Pinkerton's railroad ties, he sure helped spirit the people once they were, spirited.
That's interesting, because the flip side of that is that Alan Pinkerton and his company used to attack striking workers on behalf of particularly the railroad companies. I mean, they were no friend to working people.
Absolutely correct, Tom. But that was after Alan Pinkerton had suffered a stroke and his sons had taken over the business.
Oh, really?
Because Alan Pinkerton escaped from Scotland, where he was a Chartist, which had their early roots with Karl Marx, and they were calling for suffrage and rights for Scotland, and he had to escape for his life from the British government.
Yeah.
But just a little history for Abraham Lincoln's birthday.
Okay.
So thank you, Tom. Have
That's
a good
great.
day.
Thank you, Ron. The one thing that I wanted to I was kind of working up to this at the rant just before we hit the bottom of the hour, and let me just close this up, and then I'll continue picking up your phone calls here. This is Sam Levin in San Francisco reporting for The Guardian on February 9th. The headline, which kind of tells the whole story: California police worked with neo-Nazis to pursue anti-racist activists, documents show. Sam writes, California police worked with white supremacists to identify counter-protesters and sought the prosecution of activists with anti-racist beliefs, court documents show. The records also showed officers expressing sympathy with white supremacists and trying to protect a neo-Nazi organizer's identity from 3 anti-fascist activists who were charged with felonies after protesting at a Sacramento rally. The defendants were urging a judge to dismiss their case and accuse California police and prosecutors of a cover-up and collusion with fascists. And this is all about the Traditional Workers Party, traditional workers being white people. It's a neo-Nazi group that organized this rally. And one of the anti-fascists who is being prosecuted by the California police obtained numerous examples of California Highway Patrol, CHP officers working directly with the TWP, the Traditionalist Workers Party, often treating the white nationalist group as victims and the anti-fascists as suspects. Its leaders, the leaders of the TWP, have praised Trump, and the group claimed to bring more than 100 people to the Charlottesville white supremacist rally, where a counter-protester was killed. So, you know, it just keeps rolling along. It's the deplorables. It's breathtaking. Michael in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Tom, you know, when I'm working, I got 3 different TVs, and I record shows. So last week, I recorded some shows of you, and we had some friends over this weekend, and we discussed it. And what I'm getting ready to tell you is there has been volumes of books written about this, TV shows made about it, over $50 million made on it, and over 30 million people have died from this. Now, let me just start from the beginning so I can make it quick. It came with Columbus, but officially in the 1500s in Vienna, they knew that this disease was going around causing people to die, so they named it venereal disease. All right, let's fast forward for time. Okay, from the 1500s to 1920 to the early 1920s, Mr. Alexander Fleming came up with the penicillin. They refined it. It took them a few years. Okay, let's fast forward a little bit. So during World War I and II, Hitler denied people the penicillin that would cure. And listen, you got to remember now, they took pictures of how people looked before they got the shots and after. Some of them had blisters on their lips, mouth, all over, and it will kill you. Syphilis and gonorrhea, all that's the same thing. All right, so they knew that it would kill you. All right, let's fast forward because I want to make it quick. Now, in the 1940s, and America, see, this is how America gets involved. They went to Harry Truman, right? The doctors went to Harry Truman. This is written about in volume books. Everybody can read it. And told him we want to do something in Tuskegee, Alabama. We're going to call it Tuskegee Experiment. Now, remember, these people...
I was waiting for us to get to that.
Yeah, these people that got penicillin is not giving it to the whites or blacks. They're not giving it to who they don't like.
Right.
They try to put it like it was a black thing, but it wasn't. It was a human thing. Let me just fast forward. All right, so from 1940s all the way to 1972 when this doctor told this black lawyer about it. And so you don't know my job, so I'm not going to get into that. And told him about it, and they brought it out. So that's when it was declassified, okay, under Richard Nixon. All right, but 9 years later, Ronald Reagan came in and renamed it AIDS. I'm telling you, you don't have to believe it. You don't have to believe it. A lot of people wouldn't believe people shoot people in the head in Europe, all this world.
Michael, AIDS is not
Tom,
syphilis or gonorrhea, and syphilis and gonorrhea are not the same thing. They're caused by two different bacteria.
All right, hey, Mr. John.
And AIDS is caused by a virus.
Let me just finish. Let me just finish. Because you're a good guy. This is how these doctors, like they had this doctor on, and he molested these little girls. And they went crazy about it, okay? But all of these doctors for the last 40-some years, for the last 70-some years have let others, you can change the name. Egypt was the first name of Africa. Okay, you can change the name of anything. Yeah. Doctors are the biggest, and I know, Mr. Thomas,
Michael, you know, I'm going to stop this right now because I just,
know you are, because you know why? See, a lot of guys can go say anything else about the white supremacists and all this, but if you believe that there are doctors that will not let people die, Mr. Tom, are you serious?
I'm serious, Michael, when I say that HIV is caused. Michael, thank you for the call. HIV is caused by a virus. It's actually a very particular type of virus called a retrovirus. It's an RNA-based virus rather than a DNA-based virus, which makes it slower to move, slower to evolve, and harder to detect. In fact, it took us a long time to even figure out what the hell was going on. With AIDS, and during the 8 years of the Reagan administration, when Reagan refused to even acknowledge what was going on, his friends of mine were dying. It is not syphilis, which is a spirochetes. It's a particular, or if I'm probably mispronouncing that word, but it's a particular type of bacteria, sort of in the same spectrum of bacteria as, I believe, as things like Lyme disease. And it's not the same thing as gonorrhea, which is a more simple bacteria, but is also a deadly venereal disease. It's just not. These are different things. Jim in Belvedere, Illinois. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind?
bring up an economic theory. I don't know if you can open your mind, but I probably won't have enough time to convey everything that this entails. It would be to be able to bring economic prosperity that the Democrats or any party could say, this is your piece of America. This is your tax money coming back to you so you can reinvigorate America. And I believe the wealth of the nation is the homes in this nation. Everybody has a piece of America by virtue of home ownership.
Well, about 46% of American households, yeah.
Yeah, not everybody.
Slightly less than half.
There's less than half, but there's still it's a substantial number of people. It's known as the American dream was home ownership at one time, and I believe that wealth, if you add up all the homes that people own, that substantiates to a lot of economic activity.
So where are you going with this, Jim?
Well, you have three basic human necessities. That's food, clothing, and shelter. The only thing that's generational is the shelter. The banks have known that for years and years, right?
Sure.
So if we could profit that goose that lays the golden egg as an engine of economic activity,
it already is. It already is.
Yeah,
I mean, most people in the middle class are using their homes as ways to supplement their lifestyle.
No, I don't mean the equity, because most people are one paycheck away from losing that home too.
Yeah.
And so, if you could increase the equability of that ownership of that property by giving that taxpayer that happens to still be working. We have other programs for disabled and elderly, which I agree with, and the poor. But you could give that homeowner $2,000-3,000 back instead of giving it to some rich business that doesn't need the subsidy. Yeah. Give it back to that homeowner and target it and focus it to things.
I get what you're saying, Jim. Thank you. I disagree respectfully, but I get it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
What people fail to understand is that when taxes go up or down, frankly, for working people, it doesn't much influence anything. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Steve in New Boston, Michigan. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. Good show today.
Thank you.
I was calling in because the other day I was listening to President Trump on TV, and he was saying, people, there's another way we can get this done, and that is to elect more Republicans into our Congress.
Right.
And he's right. And so at the end of your show, which I greatly admire, that you say, tag you're it, because you actually tagged me, and I got involved with my local government, and I've been able to do some things also. But I also realize that what he said about the Republicans is the same thing for us Democrats. If we want to change things, if we want this foolishness to stop, we have got to get out to the polls. So I'd like to ask in closing the show, besides just tag you're it, which is excellent, is say tag you're it. Be sure you are a registered Democratic voter. So when you go to the polls in November, you will not be turned away. Your vote will be cast, and we will take our country back, because this is the best way we can do it.
Yeah.
And I think we need to use the media and the power of our voices to get all Democrats united together and strong as we are. We have the numbers. We are the people. We can make this change, but we have to do something about it. And so my call is let's rally, all Democrats. Let's rally together, and let's end this in November. And let's take the Congress back, and let's undo all these wrongs that's happened to us during this Trump administration.
Well, that is my regular sales pitch, Steve.
Yeah, exactly.
You not only get registered, but make sure that your registration has been taken away from you if you live in a red state by, a Republican Secretary of State or a, whoever's running the local voting area. Steve, excellent. Thank you. I got to move along, but thank you. You made your point really well. Alex in Edison, New Jersey. Hey, Alex, thanks for watching YouTube. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Happy to talk to you.
Thank you.
Just how I make a difference. I donate between $1 and say $20 to progressive candidates, mainly those who identify as Justice Democrats. I don't know if you're familiar.
Yeah, it's Cenk Uygur's thing. Yeah, I got it.
Not anymore, but yes. And I do that for these reasons, so that the candidates, number one, have more cash.
Mm-hmm.
They can claim and brag about more donors.
Yep.
to help the candidates' morale and resolve. And lastly, to show the establishment Democratic Party what they are missing.
Right.
The funny thing is this: I don't even miss the money. It's $1 here, $2 there, $5 or whatever.
Sure.
The closer they are to New Jersey, the more I give. But and just to mention two people, Paula Jean Swearengin of West Virginia and Jim Keating of New Jersey.
Yeah, Paula Jean is the person who's going to give Joe Manchin a run for his money in the primary, isn't she?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. She's. I've heard really good things about her. Troy Miller, who used to be our producer when we were in D.C., is from West Virginia, and he's very, very well informed about the politics there. And but anyway, back to you, Alex.
Yeah, just $1 would mean to anyone, if you can.
Yeah. And give it directly to the campaigns too. I mean, there are groups that are running around saying we're collecting money for progressive Democrats, but they've got their own overhead. You're paying for their website, you're paying for their administrators, you're paying for their employees, you're paying for the people who set up the super PAC. Frankly, when I donate money to political campaigns, I only give them directly to the campaigns, which is, what I would encourage. But Alex, good on you. I mean, it's an important thing. Alex, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be back. Bob Ney will be with us with Talk Media News in just a moment. Stick around. So let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner, available everywhere. And on the line with us, the author of Sideswiped, Bob Ney. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom. How are you?
I am well. Have you seen the budget proposal that the White House just released?
Show me the money. I have seen it.
Yeah, a $450 billion cut to Medicare. Do I have that right? Let me find the exact number. $3 trillion in cuts to social safety net programs, cutting the administrative staff of Social Security to the tune of more than $100 million, which is going to make Social Security a much more painful experience, trying to sign up for it. It's just breathtaking. $554 billion is the Medicare cut. How do these guys think that they're going to get away with this?
Well, on top, and I'll address that in a second, but on top of it, if you had, and he won't come on your show, but Congressman Jim Jordan from Ohio, if you had him on the show on the other end of things, he will complain endlessly about the fact that this also goes into, on top of everything that you just mentioned, this goes into a $1 trillion deficit.
Right, a multi-trillion-dollar deficit, actually. Yeah, and he's the Cokehead Caucus, right? The so-called Freedom Caucus.
Just on top, the trillion would just be on top in 2019.
Right.
So, and then the White House had to retool some of the figures because of the budget deal between the Senate D's and R's. So they had to retool some of it. But the thing that did shock me about this budget, frankly. And look, we can argue a lot about the humanities and the arts, and people will, have varied positions on those, obviously. But the one thing is the fact of the cuts with Medicare, and, as the president promised not to touch Social Security and Medicare. And if they're going to do anything to retool, tweak, reform, whatever word you want to use, you don't do it with budget numbers. History has proven that. You have to do it with the interest groups, the AARP, with people that are involved with senior programs. You have to have a long, broad discussion, as they did years ago.
Right.
So this one is it slashes. So I can't imagine how this is a non-starter. Although I'm not hearing what you do normally hear, where it's dead upon arrival. So and look at Speaker Ryan, what he did. He tried to embark on discussion of Medicare and Social Security, and that ended very, very fast this past year. But yet you're not hearing much. Now, of course, there's the $1.5 trillion transportation, infrastructure money, but it's really not 1.5 trillion. I served on the Transportation Committee, Tom. Our local district got 58 million alone for just one appropriation. And if you look at this and you start to multiply by the 435 members of Congress, 1.5 trillion might sound like a lot, but there's only actually 200 billion in there for infrastructure. So they're trying to solve the locals getting more money by saying, well, it's going to take you 2 years now instead of 20. Therefore, you save all this money you can use, in other areas of transportation budgets. Well, good luck on that.
Yeah.
Getting it from 20 to 2 years.
Yeah, it's a crock. It's the whole thing. The whole thing is a crock.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that the two Santa Claus theory. I published this on Alternate over the weekend, alternate.org, and I encourage you to read it, Bob. I think you'll find it fascinating because I go back to Judah Wisniewski and lay out the actual memos and the quotes and how Reagan pursued this and the two Santa Claus theory is real simple: force the Democrats to shoot their Santa Claus, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, by running up huge budget deficits when there's a Republican in the White House, and then screaming about the budget deficits when there's a Democrat in the White House. And they almost got Obama to shoot the Social Security Santa Claus. He actually proposed a chain CPI, which was a cut to Social Security. They got Bill Clinton to shoot a whole bunch of Democratic Santa Clauses, from food stamps to welfare programs, and declare welfare, the era over, et cetera. It's working for them, and I'm just waiting for the day when they get called out on this. But anyhow, what else is going on in the world, Bob?
Well, I wanted to focus a little bit. There's a lot of other things, but I wanted to focus a little bit on the White House.
Mm-hmm.
This Porter fiasco originally would have been a story, and it would have been, was he fired or did he quit? And what did they know when? And now gasoline's been poured on top of the thing, Tom, because everybody involved has two different versions, including the president himself.
Do you think, Bob, Donald Trump is very media savvy. I mean, you can say whatever you want about him, if he can't read a teleprompter or whatever, but the guy knows how to manipulate the media. And the news over the last couple of days coming out of the Russia investigation has been singularly bad for him. And I'm wondering if he's perfectly happy. His base doesn't care if he's trashing women. I think he's perfectly happy to have a debate about whether, Rob Porter is a wife abuser, as long as there's not a debate or even a discussion going on about Donald Trump's associations with Russian oligarchs and how basically that's the only reason that the Trump organization even still exists following their most recent bankruptcy is because of all this money from oligarchs from not just Russia, but from other countries as well, the Stan countries, for example, the former Soviet countries, where Trump has actually built a hotel. That's what's keeping him alive. And I think, frankly, he's just changing the subject on us.
Well, I mean, you're probably right. It's just my political brain dealing with, two presidents as we have and their inner office workings. Nothing has been as dysfunctional as what we've seen. So, my brain says, wait a minute, this can't be particularly purposely done, but maybe
Trump,
you're right.
Trump did the tweet.
Maybe it's a branding.
Trump did the tweet saying, hey, no due process, and he knows what that tweet is going to produce.
Sure. Well, that's true. That's true. The other issue we're watching is the unbelievable, in political terms, kind of precedent setting where Mitch McConnell says, okay, everybody, go at it on immigration. So maybe something will come together.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see.
Bob Ney, Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
The author of Sideswipe. We'll be back. We're going to check in with Richard Lang. He's got an idea about democracy. We'll be talking about after the top of the hour, and then more of the news of the day and your calls right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Edmund Morgan's book, The Meaning of Independence, John Adams, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. It's a small book. It's anecdotes of the three presidents. I think he's a little harsh on Jefferson and a little too friendly about Adams, you know, small quibbles. But it's a fascinating look into the founders of this country. And so today I'm going to read from the chapter on George Washington. The King of England, George III, was fond of farming. His favorite diversion was to ride about his lands, chatting with the tenants about the crops. Farmer George, he called himself. His arch opponent, George Washington, had the same fondness for farming. He too enjoyed riding about his lands and talking about the crops. Indeed, there was nothing else he enjoyed quite so much. But there the likeness ceased. And among the many other matters that differentiated George Washington from George III, none was more striking than George Washington's greater reserve and dignity. George Washington would never have taken the liberty of calling himself Farmer George, nor would he have allowed anyone else to do so. Even his friends took care to keep their distance, and those who forgot to were apt to be brought up short. A familiar anecdote, though perhaps apocryphal, well illustrates Washington's customary posture toward himself and toward others. During a meeting of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, a group of Washington's friends were remarking on his extraordinarily reserved and remote manner, even among his most intimate acquaintances. Governor Morris, who was always full of boldness and wit, had the nerve to disagree. He could be as familiar with Washington, he said, as with any of his other friends. Alexander Hamilton called his bluff by offering to provide a supper and wine for a dozen of them if Morris would, at the next reception Washington gave, simply walk up to him, gently slap him on the shoulder and say, "My dear General, how happy I am to see you look so well." On the appointed evening, a substantial number of people were already present when Morris arrived, walked up to Washington, bowed, shook hands, and then placed his left hand on Jefferson's shoulder and said, "My dear General, I am so happy to see you look so well." The response was immediate and icy. Washington reached up and removed the hand, stepped back, and fixed his eye in silence on Morris until Morris retreated, abashed, into the crowd. The company looked on in embarrassment, and no one ever tried it again. It seems a most un-American reaction, not the sort of thing that Americans like to see in the men they honor, certainly not the sort of thing one would look for in a leader of a popular revolution today. Yet Americans then and since have honored George Washington far beyond any other man in their history. Moreover, he earned the honor and his dignity and reserve. The aloofness that still separates him from us helped him to earn it. How this came about is part of the larger story of American independence, the story of how the American Revolution transformed some of the least lovable traits of a seemingly ordinary man into national assets. For besides his aloofness, Washington had other characteristics which at this distance appear less than admirable, but which served him and the nation well in the struggle for independence. Perhaps the most conspicuous of these traits, conspicuous at least in his surviving correspondence, was an unabashed concern for his own economic interest. Although Washington was fair in his dealings and did not ask favors of any man, he kept a constant, wary, and often cold eye on making a profit, ever suspicious, and not always without reason, that other men were trying to take advantage of him. Like most Virginia planters, he complained that London merchants were giving him too little for his tobacco or charging him too much for the goods he bought from them. When he rented to tenants, he demanded to be paid punctually and dismissed men's inability to meet their obligations as irresponsibility or knavery. If a man was so foolish as to try cheating him, he was capable of a fury that came through vividly in his letters, as when he wrote to one associate that, "All my concern is that I ever engaged myself in behalf of so ungrateful and dirty a fellow as you are." In operating his plantation at Mount Vernon, he inveighed endlessly against waste of time, waste of supplies, waste of money. "A penny saved is a penny got," he would say, or "many mickles make a muckle," by which he apparently meant that many small savings would add up to a larger one. Even in dealings with his mother, he was watchful, for he thought she had extravagant tastes. He was ready to supply her real wants, he said, but found her imaginary wants indefinite and oftentimes insatiable. Even after he left Mount Vernon in order to win a war and found a nation, his intense absorption with his estate persisted, somehow curiously out of place now and out of proportion to the historic events that he was grappling with. In the darkest hours of the war and later during some of the tensest national crises, he took time to write to the managers of his plantation about making it show a profit. In early December 1776, for example, after fleeing across the Delaware with the remnants of his army, he sent home instructions to make do without buying linen for the slaves, as a price is too heavy to be borne with. And while he was president, his weekly directives to his managers far exceeded in length the documents he prepared for his subordinates in government. No detail was too small for his attention. In December 1792, while his cabinet was rent by the feud between Jefferson and Hamilton, he sent orders that Anthony's, this is one of his slaves presumably, sore toe should be examined, and if it requires it, something should be done to it. Otherwise, as usual, it will serve him as apprentice to be in the house half the winter. 3 months later, when Hamilton was under attack in the House of Representatives for alleged corruption in the Treasury Department, Washington was worried that Caroline, who was never celebrated for her honesty, would steal some of the linen she was entrusted with cutting.
The book is The
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us is Richard Lang. Richard is the pioneer in the technology industry. He's the founding CEO of Democrasoft and author of the new book, Virtual Country. Virtualcountry.us is the website. You can tweet Richard at Richard ATDS or at Democrasoft. Richard, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Am I pronouncing everything right here?
Oh, yeah. Democrasoft, that's it.
Cool.
And, yeah.
So tell us about your book, Virtual Country, Strategies for 21st Century Democracy. What is it that you're proposing that would be uniquely 21st century about your reinvention of democracy, or how to have this?
Well, interestingly enough, today's Lincoln's birthday, and at the beginning of a chapter that answers that question, I can read you Abraham Lincoln answering that question.
Go for it.
He said, "What I want is to get done what the people desire to have done. And the question for me is how to find that out exactly." Okay. So, for the last 240 plus years, we've had 3 branches of government as set up by our founding fathers. But there's been one thing missing that entire time, mostly because it hasn't been possible to have it before. And that is a single, coherent, collective voice for we the people to weigh in on issues that affect us all, that affect our future, the planet, and to be able to do so in an advisory manner any day of the year. Not have to wait for 2 years to have another election and vote for someone else to represent us, but to have that say directly as a collective voice. So Virtual Country is essentially a proposal for how we, the people, can actually set up a non-governmental, non-profit, nonpartisan, which is important, issue-based way to weigh in on the very issues that affect us, and in so doing, just bypass the broken system and speak for ourselves collectively.
So how do you deal with the corruption of private systems like this? And we're certainly seeing this with everything from super PACs to now, since the Buckley decision in '76 said it was
First Amendment free speech for billionaires to own politicians. And then, you know, the SCOTUS doubled down on that with both McCutcheon and Citizens United. How do you prevent AstroTurf organizations from coming along and, you know, selling BS ideas, you know, promoting, you know, whatever it may be. I mean, school vouchers or something like that, and pouring millions of dollars into public relations, into, you know, Twitter and Facebook ads and whatnot to try to corrupt your process. You know, people do not seem immune to that. You know, witness who's in the White House right now.
Right. No, that's right. And, you know, the reason that this is a book as opposed to an article is because I've had devoted a fair amount of time to that. But the short version is that it's somewhat counterintuitive that by setting up what is essentially would be a public utility, this is not an idea for a social network. This is not an idea for how people can bring in their own links and their own news and debate and have a profile. This is a national institution that's being proposed that has one function, and that is to serve as a venue that is protectable because it's a single venue dedicated to one thing only, and that is the collective voice. So, you know, within that, it's what sometimes is referred to in technology as a walled garden, that there's a voting module that presents an issue to the public. That module does only two things. It sets up and educates the public as to that issue, and then it provides them with an opportunity to weigh in moderated conversation, and then to cast a vote. But there's no opportunity for a Facebook profile, for trolls, for bots. It's really a new start. It's an opportunity to reinvent what advisory say from we the people can look like.
The question itself, Richard, is going to be subject to bias. I mean, for example, if you're going to have a debate about the inheritance tax, are you going to call it the death tax? If you're going to have a debate about, you know, migration policies, are you going to refer to the family reunification policy that has gone by that name for over 100 years, not just in the United States but all over the world? Using this new rubric from the alt-right to chain migration. I mean, it's like, who decides that? Because very often the way that the issues are framed, the language framing of the issues determines the outcome pretty much in advance.
Well, that's absolutely right. And what is proposed in my book is really a departure from what we've seen happening so far. That this will be a citizen-led nonprofit whose nickname is transparency, and the people who would be populating essentially initially a citizen-led roundtable of founding stewards, a couple dozen individuals who'd be recognized in their own fields, who would be on opposite sides of political issues, but who would be mutually pledged to maintaining the integrity of this new institution. And so things like, you know, wording of questions and what goes in and what goes out would be done in a transparent manner within this by these citizens who, not just politicians, but, you know, sports figures, artists, writers, commentators, educators, whose public dedication is to transparently provide citizens with a new trustworthy institution that they know once they're there, they can trust the information they get, they can trust the way things are worded because they can see how that all came about.
Shouldn't we be able to trust our government? I mean, it seems like you know this is playing right into the hard right meme that the government is dysfunctional, the government can't be trusted, the government is broken, and therefore let's turn Social Security over to Wells Fargo and Bank of America. Let's turn Medicare and Medicaid over to you know, Aetna and Blue Cross, and you know, we've already turned about half of our military now over to defense contractors, more than half of our intelligence apparatus, private contractors. These guys are making hundreds of billions of dollars a year in profits every year from us. You know, I would argue that it was this whole you know, two Santa Claus theory, Republican Reaganomics thing that broke government in the first place. We didn't have this problem, you know, before the Grover Norquists of the world came along shilling for the billionaire class. And, you know, and David Koch ran for president for vice president in 1980 on the Libertarian ticket on the platform of what I just described, end Social Security, end Medicare, end Medicaid. And the main meme was you can't trust government. Why would we want to be buying into that and promoting that instead of trying to repair the government that has been so badly damaged by these billionaires' shills?
Well, I don't think it's one or the other, first of all. And one of the reasons it's called virtual country is because This is an initiative, a strategy that says, yes, it's good, it's important to resist what's wrong, and it's wonderful that people all over the country are doing that. But the idea that we're going to fix government, the idea that we're going to, that the very people who have been corrupted by a system that, in essence, is rigged against we the people, the idea that those people are going to somehow change their own system to make it possible for we the people to have a greater say and a greater, more importantly, influence on them is not realistic. So, this happens in parallel. This is not a governmental undertaking. This is a citizen-led initiative underway. And so this happens in parallel. It's resist on the one hand, but at the same time, we need to not just be activists, we need to be proactivists.
How do you get we just have 30 seconds left here. How do you get the buy-in from people who voted for Bernie Sanders or people who voted for Donald Trump?
Well, what I can say is that this takes it out of the partisan realm. It's an issue-based democracy. I would highly recommend that anyone who has an interest in this, which obviously if they're on your show or listening to your show, they do, to go to virtualcountry.us, because these are fantastic questions. They're addressed in detail, and it is a conversation that is already starting to include Americans across the country. So
fascinating stuff.
Happy to recommend that.
Okay, Richard Lang is the author. The book is Virtual Country, the website virtualcountry.us, and you can tweet him at Richard at DS or at Democrasoft.
Actually, it's at Richard Lang 77.
Okay, at Richard Lang 77. Thank you. Richard Lang, great work. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, sir.
Yep, we'll be right back.
Bye-bye.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. More thoughts of the day, news of the day, etc. right after this. Welcome back. Cleve in Clayton, Georgia. Hey, Cleve, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, I keep hearing you talk about Republicans, and I'm not a Republican or a Democrat. I'm an American, so I don't care who runs the deal. But the point is you keep saying that the Republicans haven't done anything for America in the last 10 years. Well, what did Barack Obama do in his 8 years? He had 2 years that he could have freed the dreamers. He could have made them citizens. He could have done anything he wanted.
He
Why
did.
didn't he do it?
He
did.
He did. Yeah, I mean,
he passed the
he created that thing.
Edict. He passed the presidential edict. That's not a law. That means when you run
it
out
actually
of
is a law.
Oh, it is? Okay. Well,
it has the force of
law.
law.
Law anymore. Okay. It's a law.
But
so
Cleve, rather than going through the long list of, Barack Obama strengthening labor protections, Barack Obama providing.
Let me ask you
okay.
Let me ask you something, Tom.
Cleve, if you're going to try and talk over me, I ain't going to go there. So I put him back on hold. Barack Obama brought health care to tens of millions of Americans. That was a major accomplishment, and he did it over without a single Republican vote, because Republicans don't want you to have health care. Republicans would rather you just die in the gutter. As long as they can keep their taxes low, as long as they can hand off money to the billionaire class that funds them, Republicans are just fine with that. Barack Obama tried to dial us back from 2 illegal wars that Republican George W. Bush got us into, and tried to save us some of the $5 to $7 trillion those wars are going to cost us. Bush is reversing that and pumping more and more soldiers into Afghanistan without any idea what he's doing and no plan for, quote, the end. And in fact, Afghanistan's going to hell in a handbasket. I defy you, Cleve, to name one thing that one piece of legislation that the Republican Party has supported and passed in the last 40 years that principally benefits average working people instead of billionaires. Name one.
Tom, where do you live?
Name one.
How many black people live in your neighborhood?
Cleve, name one.
Huh? Name one. Name one that lives within a mile of your house.
Okay. Marta in, let's see here. Are we in the Free Speech TV break? We are. Okay, Marta, hang on just a second. You're listening on Sirius XM. You're in a commercial break right now. John in McKees Rocks, Pennsylvania. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, Tom. We all know about the Republican Anarchist Party.
Yeah.
But I just feel that the Democrats should really be more progressive. I think Bernie was the leader of that, and I hope that more Americans realize the consequences of this system we're in now. Now, the only way to change that system is, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a proposal of a Bill of Rights.
Yes, a second Bill of Rights.
Yes, second Bill of Rights, yes. And you know who adopted that Bill of Rights that Roosevelt had? Japan.
Most of Europe and Japan, yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And I think if the Democrats start bringing that up, and I know the Senator Mark Pocan is going to be on Wednesday, and I think you should bring it up to him that, the Democrats need to start raising these issues because they're just controlling everything, the rich. And if the rich are going to want to control everything, then why don't they give the tax dollars that their employees get to them so they can give us food, housing, and everything else we need?
Yeah, there you go. John, thanks for the call. Excellent point. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Marta in Big Bear Lake, California. Hey, Marta, what's on your mind?
Well, I am thinking that that in order for the Democrats to take back the presidency, Congress, state offices, they need to consider one issue, which I've been doing some reading, and I believe strongly that and I found some information that substantiates this, that a strong correlation between people who had voted for Obama and then voted for Trump were in areas where the housing market suffered the most and has not recovered. And what I experienced myself and what I've, of course, seen and most people know is that millions of were foreclosed on. In fact, more than 10 million were foreclosed on, and those who were not lost 11 trillion in home value.
Yeah, and Steve Mnuchin, by the way, he owned a company that was foreclosing on people left and right, in many cases illegally, and here he is sitting as the Secretary of the Treasury. It's mind-boggling.
Right, and even soldiers who were in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they had a hard time making their payments, and he was foreclosing on them. It was horrible. Yep. And I heard Richard Wolff reported that home ownership is down, and that this is the reverse of the historical trend.
Yes.
And it has not. It has been going down. And my issue is that 75% of the young millennials were, supported Hillary Clinton, and yet, the statistics, I believe, show that the young millennials did not come out to vote. Right. And my concern is that, that as the older people are starting to pass away or whatever, let's get the young millennials energized and active. I joined the local Democratic club, and I'm seeing some young millennials, but I think we really need to address that. But also people that are nearing retirement, like myself. Home ownership is one of the most important ways to have financial security when you retire. So it cuts across the board, but I really think, the Democrats need to look at this. And Obama did, help for, I guess it was a couple of 100,000 people were helped by Obama's plan, but then it turned out to be somewhat half-hearted, according to the Center for American Progress.
Well, he couldn't get funding. You're talking about the program to bail out homeowners who got screwed by companies like Steve Mnuchin's, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, he couldn't get funding from Congress for that after the first year. I mean, that is my recollection of what happened to that program.
Right. And, it happened to me. My mom died and I inherited her home, and, and Bank of America took it away, and I was trying to get a loan notification. So I'm, partly going with my experience, but what the Center of American Progress found was that the Democrats lost counties that had been for Obama and switched to Trump, and that was in the states where, that turned the election. But it's not just about that. I want to, you know, I never heard the Democrats really, really advocating for this, and that could be the fault of the media. But you know how Bernie Sanders he just speaks loud and clear about the issues that affect people's everyday lives, and this is one of the most important. So I'm hoping that we get a gutsy Congress that is willing to fight. And, you know, the young millennials, I also want to make the point that rents are skyrocketing in Southern California and maybe elsewhere. And I believe a lot of investors came even from China, bought up a lot of the foreclosures and turned them into rentals. And now the
that's happening all over the country. It's particularly happening on the West Coast of the United States. It's happening here in Portland. And you know, you're finding in some areas that, you know, 5–10% of the housing stock is now owned by principally Chinese investors. And on the East Coast, it's more Saudi investors and Russian oligarchs and whatnot. But on the East Coast, it's principally people coming from China. And it's distorting our markets, and it's distorting them badly. And I would add that we have $1.5 or $1.6 trillion in student loan debt in the United States right now. Donald Trump just proposed a budget that is going to, you know, $3 trillion in cuts to our programs right across the board. Instead, you know, and he's adding $7 trillion to the debt so that he can massively goose our military spending. You know, we should $1.5 trillion in the context of the U.S. budget, as Trump's budget makes clear, is not that much money. We need to declare an absolute jubilee, pay off all those student loans. You know, ban for-profit education, or at least, you know, government loans to support it, and go back to what we learned from the GI Bill, that when we invest $1 in a person's education, we get $7 in additional tax revenue over their lifetime that we wouldn't have had as a country otherwise. And we should be doing this. Marta, I've got to move along, but thank you for the call. Well said. Michelle in Wake Forest, North Carolina. Michelle, what's on your mind?
Hey, thank you for taking my call, and I love your show.
Thank you.
Just for some background, I was a member of the President's Advisory Council on HIV and AIDS, inducted under President Obama. And if you remember, there were a group of 6 of us who resigned last summer in protest of this administration's policy towards HIV and AIDS. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to, you know, just point out that people like your earlier caller, Michael, those kind of people exist in this administration, and that kind of ignorance and level of misinformation and disinformation is the reason why we as providers or physicians have a hard time getting people to come in and trust us and get tested for HIV and AIDS, get treated, and so on. And this is just emblematic of why we resigned, and I'm a member of the resistance.
Yeah, good. Good. Yeah, this is, I mean, talk about fake news. The idea that HIV is actually caused by a bacteria that is some mutation of syphilis or gonorrhea is crazy. And
that is totally crazy. And then to say that physicians, you know, doctors, he said, intentionally kill people and
spread it.
We change the names of things, that change them. It's just emblematic of what's going on in this country in terms of healthcare, making sure we get people tested.
And it's the kind of crazy hysteria that is being spread in third world countries that's causing, you know, where, for example, in Ghana, they were doing a vaccination program for polio, I believe. And people started getting freaked out, thinking that they were being inoculated with AIDS. I mean, this is wrong. Michelle, thank you so much. Thank you for being a voice of sanity. I appreciate the call. And thanks for listening to SiriusXM.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We will be right back with more of your calls and more of the news of the day. I got to tell you about Duterte, the most recent stuff out of the Philippines. Trump's wannabe. Today we're reading from Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power by Noam Chomsky. Brand new book. From the preface, a note on the American dream. During the Great Depression, which I'm old enough to remember, it was bad, much worse objectively than today. But there was a sense that we'll get out of this somehow, an expectation that things are going to get better. Maybe we don't have jobs today, but they'll be coming back tomorrow and we can work together for a brighter future. This was a time of a lot of political radicalism that would hopefully lead to a different future, one with more justice, equality, and freedom, breaking down repressive class structures, and so on. There was just a general sense that this will work out somehow. Most of my family, for instance, were unemployed working class. The rise of the union movement itself was a reflection of, and a source of, optimism and hopefulness. And that's missing today. Today, there's a general feeling that nothing's coming back. It's over. The American dream, like most dreams, has large elements of myth to it. Part of the 19th century dream was the Horatio Alger story. We're dirt poor, but we're going to work hard and we'll find a way out of it, which was true to an extent. Take my father, who came in 1913 from a very poor village in Eastern Europe. He was able to get a job in a sweatshop in Baltimore and gradually work himself up to the point where he could go to college, get a degree, and finally even a PhD. He ended up living what's called a middle-class lifestyle. A lot of people could do that. It was possible for immigrants from Europe in the early days to achieve a level of wealth, privilege, freedom, and independence that wouldn't have been imaginable in their countries of origin. But now we simply know that that's not true anymore. Social mobility, in fact, is lower here than it is in Europe. But the dream persists, fostered by propaganda. You hear it in every political speech. Vote for me, you'll get the dream back. They all reiterate it in similar words. You even hear it from people who are destroying the dream, whether they know it or not. But the dream has to be sustained. Otherwise, how are you going to get people in the richest, most powerful country in world history with extraordinary advantages to face the reality that they see around them? Inequality is really unprecedented. If you look at total inequality now, it's like the worst periods of American history. But if you refine it more closely, the inequality comes from the extreme wealth in a tiny sector of the population, a fraction of the 1%. There were periods like the Gilded Age in the 1890s and the Roaring '20s and so on, when a situation developed rather similar to this, but the current period is extreme. Because if you look at the wealth distribution, the inequality comes mostly from super wealthy. Literally, the top 0.1% are just super wealthy. This is the result of over 30 years of a shift in social and economic policy. If you check, you find that over the course of these years, the government policy has been modified completely against the will of the population to provide enormous benefits to the very rich. And for most of the population, the majority, real incomes have almost stagnated for over 30 years. The middle class, in that sense, that unique American sense, is under severe attack. A significant part of the American dream is class mobility. You're born poor, you work hard, you get rich. The idea that it's possible for everyone to get a decent job, buy a home, get a car before their children go to school, and have their children go to school, it's all collapsed. Take a look at American society. Imagine yourself looking down from Mars. What do you see? In the United States, there are professed values like democracy. In a democracy, public opinion is going to have some influence on policy, and then the government carries out actions determined by the population. That's what democracy means. It's important to understand that privileged and powerful sectors have never liked democracy, and for very good reasons. Democracy puts power into the hands of the general population and takes it away from the privileged and powerful. It's a principle of concentration of wealth and power. Concentration of wealth yields concentration of power, particularly so as the cost of elections skyrockets, which forces the political parties even more deeply into the pockets of major corporations. This political power quickly translates into legislation that then increases the concentration of wealth. So fiscal policy, like tax policy, deregulation, rules of corporate governance, and a whole variety of measures, political measures designed to increase the concentration of wealth and power, yields more political power to do the same thing. And that's what we've been seeing. So we have this kind of vicious cycle in progress. I mean, the wealthy always did have an inordinate amount of control over policy. Actually, that goes back centuries. It's so traditional that it was described by Adam Smith in 1776. You read the famous Wealth of Nations. He says in England, quote, "The principal architects of policy are the people who own the society." In his day, in Adam Smith's day, merchants and manufacturers. And they make sure that their own interests are very well cared for, however grievous the impact on the people of England or others. Now, it's not merchants and manufacturers, it's financial institutions and multinational corporations. The people who Adam Smith called the masters of mankind, and they're following the vile maxim, all for ourselves and nothing for anyone else. They're just going to pursue policies that benefit them and harm everyone else. Well, that's a pretty general maxim of politics that's been studied closely in the United States. Those are the policies that have increasingly been followed. And in the absence of a general popular reaction, that's pretty much what you'd expect. Then we get into principle number 1, reduce democracy. And, you know, he goes through his 10 principles. The book, Requiem for the American Dream. Welcome back. Oh, I got an email from Donald J. Trump. Fred, there has never been a better time to start living the American dream. And Fred, I want to meet and take a photo with one of my top supporters who believes in that dream. That's why my team has put together a special sweepstakes for you and a friend to fly in, join us for dinner at Florida's most exclusive club, and take a picture together on March 2nd, 2018. All it takes is any contribution of $3 or more before the deadline to be automatically entered for this once-in-a-lifetime chance. Click here to contribute $200. Click here to contribute $100. Click here to contribute $50. Click here to contribute $35. Click here to contribute another amount. Enter to win dinner and a photo with me in Palm Beach with any contribution of $3 or more before 11:59 p.m. on February 25th, 2018. Good luck. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. How is that not a violation of the Hatch Act? I don't get it. That's mind-boggling. Chuck Schumer's office just released just sent out a press release, a fairly lengthy one that, as a member of the press, I got, and just a few minutes ago. And after more than a year of delays, missteps, and false starts, the Trump administration finally released their infrastructure plan today. Unfortunately, despite campaign promises, the Trump toll plan would do very little to make our alien infrastructure better. Instead, it would put burdens on local governments and lead to Trump tolls all over the country. Specifically, the plan would force families to pay new Trump tolls and taxes. It would break the president's promise on real investment by cutting more infrastructure spending than it would add. It would leave behind much of America, including rural America and critical infrastructure. It would undermine American workers' wages and Buy America requirements. It would roll back environmental protections, and it would undermine safety. And then he goes through and just lays out all the details of exactly how this works. This is incredible. They're proposing to cut $122 billion from the Highway Trust Fund. We'll turn that over to the corporations. Cut $14 billion from the Army Corps of Engineers. We'll turn that over to the corporations. We're going to cut $7 billion from Amtrak. We'll turn that over to the big corporations. We're going to cut $4.5 billion from aviation safety. This is, you know, Reagan fired the air traffic controllers. Trump is just going to defund them. $5 billion in rural water and wastewater grants is going to be done away with. $3.5 billion in Superfund cleanup done away with. All of this, you know, this deregulation and privatization. Just turn it over to the billionaires, right? And also, the Trump toll plan will also largely leave behind non-generating revenue infrastructure projects. In other words, if a corporation can't suck money out of us, out of you and me, they're not going to be interested, including projects like schools, lead remediation, and even rural broadband, where the cost of the project often largely exceed the revenue that can be generated. They're exempting they're exempting these big corporations from the Buy America law and from the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage law. Rolls back environmental protections and puts private developers in charge of safeguarding the public. And there's, like, you know, 5 specific quotes from the law, from the proposed budget rather, that do that. Undermines safety. It's just, this is bizarre. I don't know how to put that beyond that. Jonathan in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today? Thanks for listening to SiriusXM.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. It's interesting that you just mentioned the infrastructure, because it kind of goes along with my thoughts. I'm all for government handling a lot of things that are for the public good, where safety is a concern and profit is going to get in the way of that. Sure. But on things like our cybersecurity and things like that, isn't private industry a little bit more equipped to handle something that changes so rapidly?
That's a good question. Jonathan, and the reaction, the reality, the answer to the question has been distorted over the last 35 years by the federal government being basically defunded repeatedly, particularly agencies that offer any kind of protection. You know, back in the 40s, when our government was actually well-funded with high taxes, we built nuclear weapons from scratch without any corporations. It was, you know, the Manhattan Project was not a, I mean, there were some companies involved, but, you know, it was pretty much a government plan. In the 60s, we put men on the moon through NASA, you know, a government program. We didn't have to outsource that. So I believe that the government could, you know, deal with net infrastructure and problems quite well, thank you very much, if it was simply funded appropriately. But the problem is you're not going to get that funding out of these Republicans because anything that a private corporation can do, they want it done by a private corporation. But there's no inherent superiority of private corporations over government agencies, Jonathan.
Okay.
If anything, you know, corporations, I mean, if you've ever worked in a big company, I used to do consulting work for them, you know, for years and years. They can be far more bureaucratic than government organizations. You know, it's the whole Dilbert thing, right? So yeah, I just don't see, you know, any natural superiority. Jonathan, thank you for the call. Richard in Gandyville, West Virginia. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Good afternoon, Tom. I was just thinking, Russian election is coming up next month, right?
Yeah, in March.
March. I wonder if our government or the DNC or even the Clintons are spending any money hacking their election.
I doubt it because the outcome is a foregone conclusion. I mean, the one guy who represented a serious electoral threat to Vladimir Putin has been removed from the running, shall we say. You know, I don't know exactly what crime they charged him with, but they did, and they said that disqualified him from being a political candidate. So, you know, he's running against basically this woman who's been making the rounds in the United States on the network TV shows, who's just kind of a figurehead. So, you know, spending money to mess with the Russian elections, whether it's the DNC or the CIA, seems like a waste of time. But who knows? I don't know, Richard. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Great show, as always. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Instead of calling it Trump's infrastructure plan, I think we should label it Trump's plan to privatize and profitize our national assets.
Yep, that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's exactly what it is.
And before I get to the reason for my call, I wanted to ask if you caught Lee Camp's comedy act when he was here in Portland a couple weeks ago.
No, I didn't even know he was coming to Portland. And you know, Lee and I used to talk almost, you know, at least a couple times a week. Our cubicles were right next to each other when I was in D.C. But I'm bummed out. If I'd known he was coming to town, I would have wanted to take him out to dinner. What a shame.
Yeah, he's a brilliant guy, as
he really is.
Said. And I mean, I'd say maybe the new George Carlin.
Yeah.
And one little tidbit from his show, and I'm not trying to steal his jokes because I'm not a comedian, I'm not funny, but he said, by way of contrasting the deplorable working conditions in these Amazon mega warehouses, Lee joked, why don't we instead build huge gyms across the country that are hooked up to the energy grid, pay people to come in and ride exercise bikes. We can meet our energy needs and the obesity epidemic and fight climate change at the same time.
Okay. Yeah, Lee is good. Lee is good.
So for the reason for my call, Tom, I'm not sure if you or any callers mentioned it last week, but today the Fight for 15 movement and Poor People's Campaign are railing across the country, and 1,500 people are marching in Memphis, where 50 years ago today the sanitation workers went on strike, supported by Dr. King. And Common Dreams has a post by Julia Conley, and she quotes the Reverend William Barber, who says, quote, to truly defeat systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, and ecological devastation, all working people must have the freedom to come together and harness their power collectively, unquote. And I think the Reverend Barber really nails it, because so many people are fighting the good fight on a variety of fronts, and it behooves us to come out of our different trenches from time to time and acknowledge the interconnectedness of so many of these struggles, and in doing so draw strength from each other. The union movement is one powerful way we can do this. I mean, you've talked a lot about the effectiveness of general strikes in Europe.
Mm-hmm. And unions. I mean, just the existence of the unions. Yeah, good points all, Jeff. Very well made. Thank you for the call. Steve in Simi Valley, California. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. Before I get to the reason I call it, first of all, let me respond to what Cleet says. I'm very tired of Republicans or conservatives saying how the first 2 years Obama had a Democratic Congress. They only had a Democratic Congress for 91 days.
Yeah, it was 71 actual business days, 71 days, congressional days, yeah.
From when Al Franken was sat as a senator to when Scott Brown won the special election.
That's right.
And the sad thing is, when I hear it, people don't challenge him on that. So that's just something that bothers me.
Sure.
Anyway, second thing, Donald Trump, do you think he's more of an opportunist, or is he somebody with core values whose only core value might be the preservation of Donald Trump?
Well, I think that's certainly his highest value, and I think he is, I'm not sure I'd call him an opportunist as much as I would a predator. I mean, Donald, his refusal to pay contractors, we actually know one of those contractors. The fact that he basically lies, cheats, and steals as a business practice, and now as a political practice, and that's. So I would label him a predator. I don't think he's an opportunist, but and I agree with you. I don't think he has any core values. And Steve, thanks for the call. I don't think he has any core values beyond, what's good for Donald Trump and his family. It's just, he behaves like a mob boss.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archive.
And the question is, will Robert Mueller bring down the Trump crime family? We'll see. Welcome back. Bob, watching Free Speech TV in Farnham, Virginia. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Wonderful program today, as always. Thank you. I enjoyed your conversation with Richard Lang there, and you brought up the name Grover Norquist, and I had to chuckle remembering his statement. All we need is an idiot with a pen, and I'm thinking, well, now they have him.
You're right. You're right.
The reason, or the thought I wanted to share today was, the conversation today has talked a lot about the mob, the Trump supporters, and the way they're controlled and the way we're being divided. And it's very Pavlovian in its approach, with the bell being the flag, or red, white, and blue, John Wayne. I mean, he even solicited support from John Wayne's daughter during the primary. So that's what gets everybody to sit up on their hindquarters. But what I think was no accident, and is somehow part of this whole mix, is his whole relationship with Vince and Linda McMahon.
Oh, yeah, the Worldwide Wrestling people?
Exactly. I mean, all of those techniques, the whole mob control, crowd control, it's just manipulation. Anyway, I just wanted to mention
that's why I'm thinking that, his tweeting about how Rob Porter was actually a wonderful guy, and his talking about it, and it's been Donald Trump that has dragged this whole Rob Porter wife beater thing out for 5 days in the media. It would have died a natural death in one day, but Trump keeps dragging it out. And I think he's doing it because, like in Worldwide Wrestling, or whatever it's called, it's all about distraction. It's all about spectacle. And he does not want us to be paying attention to the fact that he just proposed a $540 billion cut in Medicare. He does not want us to discuss that. He does not want us to discuss the fact that he wants to turn all of our roads into toll roads to the profit of the billionaires. He doesn't want us to discuss, Scott Pruitt getting busted for spending $90,000 in travel just in the first couple of weeks of June. Luxury travel all over the world while he's turning our infrastructure over to the billionaires. There's just a bunch of stuff going on, and he doesn't want us discussing what Robert Mueller is coming up with, or the fact that Devin Nunes is committing obstruction of justice, at least in my opinion.
He doesn't want anyone to understand reality. What's going on?
That's right.
Giving away the federal lands. I saw black snake killers the other day, and it had put tears in my eyes to see what's happening up there. And that whole thing, I mean, it was all in the news, but it was never depicted in the news the way it is in that documentary.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're doing that to everyone. I think we're all being reduced to third world laborers. And
that's their goal.
What it's going to come down to, it's just the essentials, the water, that whole big thing that's going on now in South America with that one company trying to acquire the largest aquifer on the planet.
Yeah, that was Nestle.
It's going to come down to the few that control the essentials, and we're all just going to be fighting for scraps. So it'll be ugly.
And the first essential that they're locking down is the internet. And that's, you know, because that's the method for, exactly, for communication. That's the method for organizing. That's the tool for resisting. And they do not want us to have that either. And
Thom Hartmann 2020.
There you go.
Come on now.
Yeah, Bob, thanks a lot for the call. Good talking to you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. For all the progressive news of the day, check out the Hartmann Report, hartmannreport.com. No ads, totally free. You can comment. It's a great site. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just had a caller say I should run for president. Ain't going to happen. Just for the record, ain't going to happen. I do not have the courage or the intellectual, emotional wiring to run for office. I am so in awe and impressed by people who do, and I know a number of you who listen to or watch this program are now running for political office. And I'm just, blown away by it. It's such a marvelous thing. Let's see here. Carol in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today? Carol, you are on the air. Okay, I'm going to put Carol on hold, and let's try Amin in Whittier, California. Hey, Amin, what's up?
Tom, hey.
Hi, Amin. What's on your mind?
Hey, by the way, so much for everything you do, and you're an awesome guy. Now, as to my point about the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower outed before he was out of office. Now, the industrial military complex, we can blame a lot of responsibility for the imperialism and the colonialism that America has imposed all around the world, as we know today. But my question is, why would Eisenhower out the American establishment of the military complex when he could be coined responsible for some of the colonialism and the thwarting of other governments? Like, for example, he assassinated I forgot, was the president of Congo during his administration.
Yeah, Patrice Lumumba.
Yes, that's correct.
The colonialism is a very different thing from the military-industrial complex. I mean, colonialism inures to the benefit of individual. I mean, in South America, it was IT&T in many cases who was conspiring with the CIA and others to overthrow governments like, Allende in Argentina. There was Allende in Chile. Chile, yeah. But I don't see the two things. Eisenhower still supporting the remnants of colonialism in the United States. United Fruit was losing their grip on Hawaii at the time, and in fact, I think it was made a state during the Eisenhower administration. I don't see a conflict between him doing that, which I believe was wrong, but still, that was how we rolled, and we still do to some extent. I mean, we just discovered that Trump spent $500 million exploring for minerals in Afghanistan, and demonstrated that there's no upside to trying to extract the mineral wealth of Afghanistan because it's in the middle of a friggin' war zone, and it's just people are getting killed. So that's my take on that. I mean, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Rob in Guys Mills, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for bringing so much truth to people. I hope that people understand we're never going to fix our problems without getting the truth and honesty.
And getting involved.
Yeah, right. And what I'm doing, I'm trying to reach out to more of the younger people. And I think maybe the rest of us need to start thinking about this too. I think if you investigated this country, you would actually find out that about 97% of it is in line with Democrats. But we need to reach across the aisle to these other people and say, why is it you think you believe what you do? What do you think these people are doing for you?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been trying to do this with my own best friends for like 40 years, and I'm like, why do you keep voting to ruin your own environment, you know, to destroy your own life, and you keep supporting these people? I believe it's actually a psychological brainwashing from watching too much of the television.
I think you're right.
You get programmed this stuff over and over and over. But I think what we need to do, I'm really seeing a problem with the younger people out by like Colorado and those western states out there. I think we need to start calling them out and saying, that's wrong. You've been lied to. Somebody told you the wrong information.
Yeah.
And let me tell you why.
I think people are waking up, Rob. It's obviously people who are deep in the Fox right-wing hate radio bubble are not, they're not waking up. They're being lied to literally day after day after day, including the president of the United States. Donald Trump is being lied to by Fox and Friends regularly, and then he goes and retweets this stuff, and then he has to correct it because it was a lie. But beyond that, we just have to be waking folks up. Rob, thanks for the call. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to add on to a conversation. The guy that was, when you commented and rebutted to him about Obama and bringing health care to millions of people, the point I wanted to make to add another facet to that was they were outsourcing jobs, by the millions through that period of time.
Sure.
And it showed great foresight and insightful. They were insightful to get that through, and they're not getting any credit for it. And when it's gone, we're sorely going to miss it because there were like.
What's the it you're talking about here, Randy? What did I miss?
Pardon?
You're talking about an it, and I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, Obamacare.
Oh, I see.
The fact that they put this mechanism in motion at about the same time that we were losing 750,000 jobs a month.
Right.
That as they were bleeding that wealth that's just come back in this last tax cut with their tax cut thing, this repatriation thing, all the wealth that was drained out of this country, that healthcare program was very insightful for them to have that at that time. It was something for the people, and a lot of people missed.
Oh, and it was a clear and honest attempt to do the very best possible. It wasn't single-payer health care, but they needed Chuck Grassley's vote, or whoever, Susan Collins, I guess, or Olympia Snowe. One of them was the one vote to get the thing out of committee. But Randy, thank you for the call. I think Obamacare. We're going to look back on it and see that it was the precursor to single-payer health care. I really believe. Anyhow, thanks so much for being with me today. It's amazing times, as I often note. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It's not enough to sit around and complain. You got to get out there. You got to get active. You got to get registered. You got to vote. Tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242.
Or visit tomsbeats.com.